The Douglas firs along Route 138 don't just line the road. They swallow it. By the time you're 15 miles past Steamboat, the canopy closes overhead like a fist, and your headlights barely make a dent in the black. I've been running this stretch between Roseburg and Diamond Lake for 9 years, hauling timber equipment, construction supplies, whatever needs moving through the Cascade Range. Most nights, it's just me, the hum of the engine, and the endless parade of tree trunks sliding past my windows like bars on a cage. That's how it was supposed to be on the night of October 14th, 2023. Just another run. Just another load. Just another dark road that I knew by heart. But that night, something changed. It started with the weather. A cold front had been pushing down from Canada all week, and by the time I rolled out of Roseburg at 9:30, the temperature had dropped into the low 30s. Fog crept in from the valleys, thick and low, clinging to the asphalt like it had weight. My wipers were on intermittent, smearing moisture across the glass every few seconds, and the defroster was cranked high enough that I could feel the heat baking my knuckles on the wheel. The CB was quiet, not unusual for this route, but tonight it felt different, heavier, like the static itself was holding its breath. I'd been on the road for about an hour when I saw the first reflector. It was a small, orange square nailed to a post, the kind the Forest Service uses to mark trailheads and turnoffs. I didn't think much of it at first. Plenty of those scattered along 138, most of them leading to hiking trails or old logging roads that haven't seen traffic in decades. But then I saw another one, and another, spaced about 100 yards apart, each one catching my headlights just long enough to throw a brief flash of color into the fog before disappearing again. It was like breadcrumbs, like someone was marking a path. I reached for my coffee thermos, took a sip, and tried to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. Probably just trail markers, I told myself. Probably nothing. But the further I drove, the more I noticed them. And the more I noticed them, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that they were guiding me somewhere, leading me deeper into the forest, deeper into the fog, deeper into something I didn't understand. I checked my mirrors. Empty. Nothing but darkness, and the faint glow of my trailer lights reflecting off the mist. I was alone out here, completely alone. That's when I saw the truck. It was parked on the shoulder about a quarter mile ahead, nose pointed toward the trees. No lights, no flashers, just a dark silhouette against the darker forest. As I got closer, I could make out the shape. It was a pickup, older model, maybe a Ford or a Chevy, with a rusted tailgate and a dented bumper. The driver's door was open, not wide, just cracked, like someone had stepped out in a hurry and forgotten to close it all the way. The dome light was off, the cab was empty. I eased off the throttle and let my rig slow to a crawl. My first instinct was to keep going, mind my own business, stay on schedule. But something about the way that door hung open, the way the truck sat so still, so abandoned, made me hesitate. I've been driving long enough to know that people don't just leave their vehicles on the side of a mountain road in the middle of the night. Not without a reason. Not without help. And if someone was out there, hurt or lost, or worse, I couldn't just roll past and pretend I didn't see it. I pulled my rig onto the shoulder about 50 feet behind the pickup and put on my hazards. The yellow lights strobed against the fog, turning everything into a pulsing, dreamlike blur. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening. The silence was immediate and oppressive. No wind, no animals, no distant hum of traffic. Just the faint ticking of my cooling engine and the soft hiss of the fog pressing against the windows. I grabbed my flashlight from the door pocket, a heavy mag light that could double as a weapon if it came to that, and stepped down from the cab. The cold hit me like a slap. The moisture in the air made it feel 10 degrees colder than it was, and my breath came out in thick clouds that hung in front of my face before dissolving into the mist. I zipped my jacket up to my chin and walked toward the pickup, keeping my flashlight low. The beam cut through the fog in a pale cone, illuminating the gravel shoulder, the edge of the trees, the rusted tailgate with its faded license plate. Oregon tags, local. That made it worse somehow. This wasn't some out-of-state tourist who'd pulled over to take pictures and wandered off. This was someone who knew these roads, someone who should have known better. I reached the driver's door and pulled it open the rest of the way. The hinges creaked, loud in the silence, and the dome light flickered on. The interior was a mess. Fast food wrappers littered the floor, along with empty soda cans and a crumpled map of the Umpqua National Forest. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine was cold. I reached in and touched the seat. Dry, no rain, no dew. Whoever had been sitting here had left recently. Within the last hour, maybe less. I backed away from the truck and swept my flashlight across the shoulder. The gravel was scuffed, like someone had been pacing, but there were no clear footprints. The fog made it impossible to see more than 20 feet in any direction, and the forest beyond was a wall of black. I called out, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Hello? Anybody out there? You need help?" Nothing, just my own voice echoing back to me, thinner and weaker than it should have been. I tried again, louder this time. "Hello? I'm a trucker. I can call for help if you need it." Still nothing. Just the silence and the fog and the feeling that I was being watched. I turned back to my rig, intending to grab my CB and call it in, when I saw the orange reflector. It was nailed to a tree about 10 feet into the forest, just visible through the fog. And beyond it, barely discernible, was another one. And another, the same markers I'd been seeing along the road, only now they were leading into the trees. Into the forest. Into the dark. My stomach tightened. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had marked this trail. Someone had wanted it found. I should have gotten back in my truck. I should have called the cops and let them handle it. But something about those reflectors, about the way they seemed to glow in the beam of my flashlight, pulled at me, made me curious, made me stupid. I took a step toward the trees, then another. The ground beneath my boots was soft, covered in a thick layer of pine needles and moss that muffled my footsteps. The air smelled like wet earth and rotting wood, and the fog pressed in closer, turning the world into a narrow tunnel of pale light and shadow. I followed the reflectors deeper into the forest. They were spaced about 20 feet apart, each one guiding me further from the road, further from my truck, further from safety. The trees grew thicker here, their trunks massive and ancient, their branches twisting overhead like skeletal fingers. My flashlight beam seemed weaker now, swallowed by the darkness, and I had to stop every few steps to make sure I was still on the trail. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the sound of my own breathing and the faint crunch of needles under my boots. After about 5 minutes, I came to a clearing. It wasn't large, maybe 30 feet across, and it was ringed by trees so tall I couldn't see their tops. In the center of the clearing was a pile of something. Clothes, maybe, or tarps. I couldn't tell from where I stood. I moved closer, my flashlight beam sweeping across the ground, and that's when I saw the blood. It was dark, almost black in the pale light, and it was everywhere. Smeared across the ground, splattered on the nearby trees, pooled in the hollows between roots, and in the center of the clearing, half buried under a tangle of canvas and rope, was a body. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up, and for a moment I couldn't move, couldn't think. Couldn't do anything but stare at the shape in front of me and try to process what I was seeing. It was a man, or it had been. His face was turned away, but I could see his arms, pale and lifeless, sticking out from under the canvas. His hands were bound with rope. His clothes were torn. And the blood. God, the blood was everywhere. I took a step back, my boot catching on a root, and I nearly went down. My flashlight beam jerked across the clearing, and that's when I saw the second body. And the third. They were scattered around the edges of the clearing, half hidden by the fog and the shadows, and they were all in the same state. Bound, bloodied, dead. My stomach lurched, and I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from being sick. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a hiking trip gone wrong. This was a dumping ground, a burial site, a place where someone had been bringing bodies for God knows how long. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just ran. My boots slipped on the wet ground and branches tore at my jacket. But I didn't care. I had to get out of there. Had to get back to the road. Had to call the cops and tell them what I'd found. The orange reflectors blurred past me as I retraced my steps, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly, and I could feel my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The fog seemed thicker now, pressing in on me from all sides, and I had the sudden irrational fear that I wouldn't be able to find my way back, that I'd be lost in these trees forever, just another body in the clearing. But then I saw the road, the faint glow of my hazard lights cutting through the mist. I burst out of the trees and stumbled onto the shoulder, gasping for air, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. My rig was right where I'd left it, and the pickup was still sitting there, door open, keys in the ignition. For a moment I just stood there trying to catch my breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. And that's when I heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable, the crunch of gravel, footsteps, coming from behind the pickup. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping across the darkness, and I saw him, a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He was standing on the other side of the pickup, watching me, just standing there, motionless. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold, calculating, waiting. My breath caught, and for a second, neither of us moved, and then he stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. I didn't wait to see what he wanted. I turned and ran for my truck, my boots slipping on the wet gravel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I heard him behind me, not running, not shouting, just walking. Steady, unhurried, like he knew I couldn't get away. I reached the cab and yanked the door open, nearly tearing it off its hinges and threw myself inside. My hands fumbled for the keys, and for one horrible second I thought I'd dropped them. But then I felt the metal in my palm, and I jammed the key into the ignition and cranked the engine. It roared to life, the sound deafening in the silence, and I threw the gear shift into drive. My rig lurched forward, tires spinning on the wet gravel, and I didn't look back. Didn't check the mirrors. I just drove, fast. Faster than I should have on a road like this, in fog like this, but I didn't care. I had to get away. Had to put distance between me and that clearing, between me and that man, between me and whatever the hell I'd just stumbled into. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, a tiny place called Glide, barely more than a gas station and a handful of houses clustered around a single intersection. I pulled into the lot, killed the engine, and sat there, shaking. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, and my breath was fogging up the windshield faster than the defroster could clear it. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. I tried again. Nothing. I was about to get out and use the payphone by the gas station when I saw headlights. A truck, the same pickup from the road. It rolled into the lot, slow and deliberate, and parked at the far end, facing me. My blood turned to ice. I could see the silhouette of the driver through the windshield, but I couldn't make out any features. Just a shape. Watching. Waiting. I grabbed the CB mic and keyed it, my voice shaking. Any units on 138, this is a commercial vehicle at the Glide fuel stop. I need immediate assistance. Repeat, I need immediate assistance. Static. Nothing. I tried again, louder this time. Anybody out there? I've got a situation here. I need help. Still nothing. The pickup's headlights flicked off, then back on, off, on, like a signal, like a message. And then it started moving. Slow. Creeping across the lot toward me. I fired the ignition, threw the truck into gear, and punched the gas. My rig roared out of the lot, trailer swaying, and I hit the road doing 50. The pickup followed. Not speeding, not trying to catch up, just following, keeping pace, staying close enough that I could see its headlights in my mirrors, but far enough that it never quite closed the distance. And that's when I realized. This wasn't about catching me. This was about following me, about seeing where I went, about making sure I knew I was being watched. I drove for 20 miles without stopping, my eyes flicking between the road and the mirrors, and the pickup never fell back. It stayed there, like a shadow, like a ghost, and no matter how fast I went, no matter how many turns I took, it was always there, always watching, always following. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. I blinked, and the headlights were no longer in my mirror. I slowed, checking every angle, every sight line, but there was nothing. Just the road, just the fog, just the silence. I didn't stop again until I reached Roseburg. I pulled into the first truck stop I saw, parked under the brightest lights I could find, and called the police. A deputy arrived about 20 minutes later, a tired-looking guy in his 50s with a clipboard and a skeptical expression. I told him everything. The pickup, the trail, the clearing, the bodies, the man, the chase. He wrote it all down, nodding occasionally, but I could tell he didn't believe me. When I finished, he closed his notebook and looked at me like I was a ghost story he'd heard 100 times before. "We'll send someone out to check the area," he said. "But I gotta be honest with you. That stretch of 138 is rough this time of year. Fog plays tricks on people. Makes you see things that aren't there." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that I knew what I'd seen, that I wasn't crazy, that those bodies were real, but the look in his eyes told me it wouldn't matter. He'd already made up his mind. I was just another tired trucker with a wild story and no proof. He gave me his card, told me to call if I remembered anything else, and left. I sat in my cab for the rest of the night, watching the lot, watching the road, watching for any sign of that pickup. But it never came back. And when the sun finally rose, turning the fog into a thin gray haze, I felt like I'd been holding my breath for hours. I didn't drive 138 again for a month. And when I finally did, I kept my eyes on the road and didn't stop for anything. Not for abandoned trucks, not for orange reflectors, not for anything. Because whatever's out there, in those trees, in that clearing, it's still there, still waiting, still watching. And I have a feeling it knows my face now, knows my truck, knows that I'm the one who got away. 3 days passed before I got the call. I was at a truck stop outside Eugene, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Maybe curiosity, maybe the part of me that needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, gruff, with the kind of tired edge that comes from too many years on the job and not enough sleep. "This Wade Tolliver?" the voice asked. I confirmed it was, and the man on the other end let out a long breath. Name's Herschel Kincaid. I'm a driver out of Coos Bay. Got your number from a guy at the Roseburg Depot. Said you had some trouble out on 138 a few nights back. I sat up straighter, my grip tightening on the phone. Yeah, I said slowly. What about it? There was a pause, long enough that I thought the line had gone dead. Then Kincaid spoke again, his voice lower now, almost cautious. I think I found what you were looking for, he said. Or maybe it found me. Either way, we need to talk. In person, not over the phone. My stomach clenched. What do you mean you found it? I asked, but he was already talking over me. There's a diner off Highway 42, about 10 miles south of Coquille. Place called Mabel's. Meet me there tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Don't be late. And Tolliver? Don't tell anyone where you're going. He hung up before I could ask anything else. I stared at the phone for a long moment, my mind racing. This could be nothing. Could be some crank caller who'd heard a rumor and wanted to mess with me. But something about the way Kincaid had spoken, the tension in his voice, the urgency, told me it was real. He knew something. He'd seen something. And whatever it was, it had scared him enough to track me down. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my cab, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of other rigs idling around me, and wondering what the hell I was getting myself into. The next morning, I was on the road by 6. Highway 42 cuts through some of the most remote parts of southwestern Oregon, winding through dense forests and river valleys that feel like they belong to another century. The fog was back, thicker than before, and it clung to the road like it was trying to pull me off course. By the time I reached Mabel's, a squat little diner with peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered in the gray morning light, my nerves were shot. I parked my rig at the far end of the lot, away from the handful of cars clustered near the entrance, and walked inside. The place was nearly empty. A few locals sat at the counter, nursing coffee and flipping through newspapers, and a waitress with tired eyes stood by the register, barely glancing up as I entered. I scanned the booths and spotted him immediately. Herschel Kincaid was sitting in the back corner, his back to the wall, watching the door like he'd been expecting me. He was older than I'd imagined, probably in his early 60s, with a weathered face and hands that looked like they'd spent decades gripping a steering wheel. His eyes were sharp, though, alert, the kind of eyes that didn't miss much. I slid into the booth across from him, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The waitress came over, poured me a cup of coffee I didn't ask for, and disappeared again. Kincaid watched her go, then leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "You really saw it, didn't you?" he asked. "The clearing, the bodies, the man." I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah," I said, "I saw it, and I'm guessing you did too." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He smoothed it out on the table between us, and I saw that it was a map. A topographical map of the Umpqua National Forest marked with red X's and circled areas. "I've been running these routes for 23 years, Kincaid said, his finger tracing one of the X's. "And about 5 years ago, I started noticing things. Trucks left on the shoulder, orange markers leading into the trees, smears of blood on the gravel that nobody else seemed to see." He looked up at me, his eyes dark. At first, I thought I was imagining it, thought the job was getting to me. But then I started asking around, talking to other drivers, and I found out I wasn't the only one. There were others. Guys who'd seen the same things. Abandoned vehicles, trails marked with reflectors, and every single one of them said the same thing. They'd seen a man, tall, broad-shouldered, always watching, always following, but never catching up. My blood ran cold. "Who is he?" I asked, but Kincaid just shook his head. I don't know, he said, and I don't think anyone does. But I've got a theory. I think he's been using these forest routes for years, maybe decades, bringing people out here. Hunters, hikers, hitchhikers, people nobody would miss, and I think he's still doing it. He tapped one of the X's on the map, a spot near Tokatee Falls, about 30 miles east of where I'd been. 2 weeks ago, I found another truck, he said. Same setup, door open, keys in the ignition. No driver. I followed the markers, just like you did. And I found another clearing, more bodies, more blood, and the same feeling, like I was being watched, like I wasn't supposed to be there. He folded the map and slid it across the table to me. I'm not going back, he said. I've got a wife, kids, grandkids. I'm not risking it, but you? You're younger. You've got time. And I think you're stubborn enough to see this through. So I'm giving you this. All my notes, all the locations I've found. Do what you want with it. But if you're smart, you'll burn it and forget you ever saw that clearing. I stared at the map, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to do exactly what he said. Burn it, walk away, pretend none of this had ever happened. But the other part, the part that couldn't stop thinking about those bodies, about the man in the shadows, about the way that Pickup had followed me, knew I couldn't. I had to know, had to understand, had to find out who he was and why he was doing this. I looked up at Kincaid. What happened to the other drivers? I asked. The ones who saw what we saw. Where are they now? Kincaid's expression darkened. Most of them quit, he said, sold their rigs, found other work, but a few of them kept driving, and a few of those never made it home. The diner suddenly felt too small, too bright, too exposed. I folded the map and shoved it into my jacket pocket. Thanks for this, I said, standing. Kincaid grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. One more thing, he said. If you go back out there, don't go alone, and don't go at night. Whatever he is, he owns the dark. You give him that advantage, you won't make it out. I nodded, pulled my arm free, and walked out of the diner without looking back. The fog had thickened while I was inside, turning the parking lot into a ghostly blur. I climbed into my cab, locked the doors, and sat there for a long moment, staring at the map in my hands. Kincaid's X's covered a 30-mile stretch of forest, all of them clustered around Route 138 and its tributaries. And in the center of them all, circled in red, was the spot where I'd found the first clearing. I knew I should call the cops, should hand over the map and let them deal with it. But I also knew they wouldn't believe me. They hadn't believed me the first time, and they wouldn't believe me now. Not without proof, not without something concrete. And the only way to get that was to go back, to find another clearing, to document it, to make it undeniable. I fired up the engine and pulled out of the lot, heading east toward the mountains. The fog pressed in on all sides, and the road seemed to narrow with every mile, the trees leaning in like they were trying to close the gap. I kept the map on the seat beside me, glancing at it every few minutes, and with each glance, the weight of what I was doing settled deeper into my chest. By noon, I was back on Route 138. The forest was quiet, the kind of oppressive silence that makes you want to turn on the radio just to fill the void. But I didn't. I needed to hear, needed to stay alert. Kincaid's next X was about 15 miles ahead, marked near a turnoff for an old logging road. According to his notes, he'd found a sedan there, abandoned, with the same orange markers leading into the trees. I slowed as I approached the turnoff, scanning the shoulder for any sign of the vehicle. And there it was, a rusted-out Honda, parked at an angle, half in the ditch. The driver's door was closed this time, but the window was smashed, glass glittering on the gravel like tiny diamonds. I pulled over, put on my hazards, and stepped out. The air was colder here, the fog so thick I could barely see 20 feet ahead. I walked to the sedan and peered inside. The interior was trashed, seats torn, dashboard cracked. But what caught my attention was the blood. It was smeared across the steering wheel, dried and dark, and there was more on the seat, pooled in the fabric like it had soaked in over time. My stomach turned, and I backed away, my flashlight sweeping across the shoulder. And there they were, the orange reflectors. 3 of them nailed to trees just beyond the ditch, glowing faintly in the fog. I should have stopped there, should have taken pictures, called the cops, and let them handle it. But I didn't. I grabbed my flashlight, zipped my jacket, and followed the markers into the trees. The forest here was different from the first clearing. The trees were younger, thinner, and the ground was rockier, covered in fallen branches and moss-slick stones. The markers led me uphill, winding through the undergrowth, and I had to stop every few minutes to catch my breath. My lungs burned, and my legs ached, but I kept going. Kincaid had been right. There was something here, something real, and I was going to find it. After about 20 minutes, the trail leveled out, and I found myself standing at the edge of another clearing. This one was smaller than the first, maybe 20 feet across, and it was littered with debris. Tarps, rope, plastic sheeting, all of it stained and torn. And in the center, half buried under a mound of dirt and leaves, was another body. I didn't get close this time. Didn't need to. I could see enough from where I stood. The pale skin, the bound hands, the unnatural angle of the limbs. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. Flash after flash lit up the clearing, freezing the scene in stark, horrifying detail. And then I heard it. A sound. Faint, but unmistakable. The snap of a branch. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the fog, and my heart stopped. He was there, the man, standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 30 feet away. He wasn't moving, wasn't speaking, just standing there watching me. His face was still hidden in shadow, but I could see his shape. Tall, broad, solid, and he was holding something, a shovel, long-handled, dirt-crusted, gripped in both hands like a weapon. For a moment, neither of us moved. The forest was silent, the fog pressing in on all sides, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. And then he took a step forward. Slow, deliberate, testing. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I turned and ran. My boots slipped on the wet ground, and I nearly went down twice, but I kept moving, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at my jacket. I could hear him behind me. Not running, not chasing, just following. Steady, patient. Like he knew I couldn't outrun him, like he knew exactly where I'd end up. I burst out of the trees and onto the shoulder, gasping for air, my legs screaming. My rig was right where I'd left it, hazards still flashing, and I threw myself into the cab, slamming the door and hitting the locks. My hands fumbled with the keys, and for one horrible second I thought I'd dropped them. But then the engine roared to life, and I threw the truck into gear, gravel spraying as I pulled back onto the road. I checked the mirrors, expecting to see him standing there watching me go, but the shoulder was empty. The fog had swallowed him whole. I drove for 2 hours without stopping, my knuckles white on the wheel, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The pictures, I had the pictures. That was proof. That was evidence. That was something the cops couldn't ignore. But as the miles rolled by and the adrenaline started to fade, a new thought crept into my mind. What if they still didn't believe me? What if they said the pictures were fake? What if they said I'd staged it? I needed more, needed something they couldn't dismiss. And the only way to get that was to find out who he was, to put a name to the shadow, to make him real. That's when I remembered Boyd Reddick. He ran a garage outside Sutherland, just off Interstate 5. He'd been servicing my rig for years, and more importantly, he'd been around these parts his whole life. If anyone knew the history of Route 138, the rumors, the stories, it was Boyd. I changed course, heading north, and by the time I pulled into his lot, the sun was starting to set. Boyd was in the bay, elbow deep in the engine of a Peterbilt when I walked in. He looked up, wiped his hands on a rag, and grinned. "Wade Tolliver," he said. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon. What brings you in?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Boyd," I said, "I need you to tell me everything you know about Route 138. The forest, the old logging roads, and anything you've heard about people going missing out there." His grin faded. He tossed the rag onto the workbench and crossed his arms, his expression suddenly guarded. "Why?" he asked. "What did you see?" I told him, all of it. The clearings, the bodies, the man, the orange markers. And when I finished, Boyd was silent for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. Finally, he spoke. "You're not the first person to come in here asking about that," he said. "And you won't be the last." Boyd walked over to a filing cabinet in the corner of the garage, the kind that looked like it had been there since the 70s, dented and covered in oil stains. He pulled open the bottom drawer and rummaged through a stack of yellowed papers, muttering to himself. After a moment, he pulled out a folder and dropped it on the workbench between us. The folder was thick, stuffed with newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and what looked like police reports. "This goes back 40 years, Boyd said, flipping it open. "Maybe longer. My old man kept these, said it was important to remember, to know what was out there." He pulled out a clipping from 1987. The headline read, "Hiker missing on Route 138, search suspended." Below it was a grainy photo of a young man, smiling, standing in front of a trailhead sign. Name was Danny Pruitt, Boyd said. 23 years old. Went up to hike the North Umpqua Trail and never came back. Rangers searched for 2 weeks. Found his car parked at a turnoff, keys in the ignition. No sign of struggle. Just gone. He pulled out another clipping, then another. Each one told a similar story. Hikers, hunters, hitchhikers, all of them disappearing along the same stretch of highway. Some of the cases were investigated, some weren't, but none of them were ever solved. "The locals don't talk about it much," Boyd continued, his voice low. "But everybody knows. Route 138 is cursed, or haunted, or whatever you want to call it. People go in, and they don't come out. And the ones who do come out, they're never the same." He looked at me, his eyes hard. "You want my advice? Stop digging. Stop looking. Because the more you look, the more you'll find. And trust me, Wade, you don't want to find what's at the end of this." I stared at the clippings, my stomach churning. 40 years. 40 years of disappearances, and nobody had done anything. Nobody had connected the dots. Or maybe they had and they just didn't care. "What about the man?" I asked. "The one I saw? The one following people? Has anyone ever seen him before?" Boyd hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There's stories," he said. "Old stories. My old man used to tell me about a guy who lived out in the forest back in the 60s. Worked for the lumber companies, clearing roads and marking trails. Name was something like Cutler or Coulter. I can't remember exactly. But people said he was strange, kept to himself, didn't talk much. And then one day he just disappeared. walked into the woods and never came back. Boyd tapped the folder. A few years later, loggers started finding things. Campsites that looked lived in, but nobody ever saw anyone there. Tools left behind. Clothes. And then the disappearances started. At first, people thought it was bears or cougars. But bears don't take your shoes. They don't leave markers. They don't watch you from the trees. He closed the folder and pushed it toward me. "Take it," he said. "Maybe it'll help you figure out what you're dealing with. But Wade, I'm serious. If you keep pushing this, if you keep going back out there, you're going to end up like one of those clippings. Just another name on a list that nobody remembers." I took the folder, my hands trembling slightly. "I can't just let it go," I said. "I saw those bodies, Boyd. I saw what he did to them. If I don't do something, he's just going to keep doing it, and more people are going to die." Boyd shook his head, his expression grim. "Then don't go alone," he said. "And for God's sake, don't go at night." I thanked him, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked out into the fading light. The sun was setting behind the mountains, turning the sky a deep orange that bled into purple at the edges. My rig sat in the lot, massive and solid, and for a moment I just stood there, staring at it. This was my livelihood, my life. And now it felt like a cage, a trap, something that kept pulling me back to the same roads, the same forests, the same darkness. I climbed into the cab and spread the folder out on the passenger seat. The clippings were organized by date, and as I flipped through them, a pattern emerged. The disappearances clustered around specific times of year. Late fall and early spring, times when the fog was thick and the roads were empty, times when a person could vanish and nobody would notice for days, and they all happened within a 30-mile radius of Route 138. I pulled out Kincaid's map and laid it next to the clippings. The X's he'd marked lined up almost perfectly with the locations where people had gone missing. It wasn't random. It was systematic, deliberate. This wasn't some opportunistic killer. This was someone who knew the area, who knew the roads, who knew exactly where to go and when to strike. I sat back, my mind racing. If Boyd's story was true, if the man I'd seen was the same person who disappeared in the 60s, then he'd been doing this for over 50 years. 50 years of hunting, of hiding, of killing, and nobody had stopped him. Nobody had even tried. But why? Why hadn't the police done anything? Why hadn't they connected the cases? The answer was obvious. Because nobody cared. These weren't wealthy tourists or prominent locals. These were drifters, hitchhikers, people on the margins, people who wouldn't be missed, people who were easy to forget. And that made me angrier than anything else, because it meant that if I didn't do something, nobody would. I fired up the engine and pulled out of Boyd's lot, heading back toward Route 138. The sun had set completely now, and the darkness was absolute. My headlights cut through the black, illuminating the road in narrow slices, and the trees pressed in on all sides like walls. I knew I was being reckless, knew I should wait until morning, should call the cops, should do this the right way. But I also knew that if I waited, he'd move. He'd clear out the clearings, bury the evidence, and disappear back into the forest, and I'd be left with nothing but stories and suspicions. I had to act now. Had to catch him off guard. Had to make him real. The first X on Kincaid's map was the clearing where I'd found the first bodies. I didn't go back there. Too much ground to cover, too much risk. Instead, I headed for the third X, a spot marked near Diamond Lake about 40 miles east. According to Kincaid's notes, he'd found tire tracks there, leading off the main road and into the forest. Deep tracks, like someone had been hauling something heavy. I reached the turnoff just after 9 o'clock. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for my rig, and the trees hung so low over the asphalt that branches scraped the top of my trailer as I passed. I slowed to a crawl, my eyes scanning the shoulder for any sign of the tracks. And then I saw them. 2 deep ruts cutting into the gravel, leading off the road and into the darkness. I pulled over, put on my hazards, and grabbed my flashlight. The air outside was freezing, and my breath came out in thick clouds that hung in front of my face. I followed the tracks into the trees, my boots crunching on the frozen ground. The tracks were fresh, no more than a few days old, and they led deeper into the forest, winding around massive tree trunks and over-fallen logs. After about 10 minutes, I saw a light. Faint, flickering like a campfire. I killed my flashlight and crouched low, moving slowly, trying to stay silent. The light grew brighter, and I could hear sounds now. The crackle of flames, the scrape of metal on wood, and voices. Low, indistinct, but definitely human. I crept closer, staying behind the trees, and peered into a small clearing. There was a fire in the center, built inside a ring of stones, and next to it was a tarp stretched between 4 posts, creating a makeshift shelter. Under the tarp were supplies: canned food, water jugs, rope, tarps, and tools. Shovels, axes, saws, all of them stained and worn. And sitting by the fire, warming his hands, was the man. He was older than I'd expected. Maybe in his 70s, with a long gray beard and hollow eyes that reflected the firelight. He was muttering to himself, words I couldn't make out, and every few seconds he'd glance toward the trees like he was expecting something. Or someone. I pulled out my phone and started recording. My hands were shaking, but I kept the camera steady, capturing his face, the camp, the tools. This was it. This was the proof. This was what the cops needed. But as I recorded, something shifted in the clearing. The man stopped muttering, stopped moving. And then, slowly, he turned his head and looked directly at me. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. He didn't shout, didn't move, he just stared, his expression unreadable, and then he smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile, the kind that said he knew exactly who I was and exactly what I'd seen. And then he stood. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, my boots pounding the frozen ground, branches whipping at my face. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush, his breathing heavy and ragged. He was fast, faster than he should have been for a man his age. I burst out of the trees and onto the shoulder, my lungs burning, and threw myself into my cab. My hands fumbled with the keys, and I could see him in the side mirror, emerging from the trees, still smiling. I cranked the engine, threw the truck into gear, and punched the gas. The tires spun on the gravel, and for one horrible second, I thought I was stuck. But then they caught, and the rig lurched forward, accelerating down the road. I didn't stop until I was back in Sutherland, parked under the brightest lights I could find. My hands were still shaking, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I pulled out my phone and checked the recording. It was there, all of it, the camp, the tools, his face, and that smile. I had him. I had proof. I called the police, and this time I didn't get a deputy. I got a detective, a woman named Strand, who listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Send me the video. I'll look into it." I sent it immediately, and she promised to call me back within the hour. But the call never came. I waited all night, sitting in my cab, watching the parking lot, jumping at every sound. By morning, I was exhausted, paranoid, and starting to doubt everything. I called the station again, asked for Detective Strand, and was told she wasn't available. I left a message, then another, and another, but she never called back. 2 days later, I got a letter. Not from the police. From an attorney. It was brief, clinical, and terrifying. It informed me that I was under investigation for trespassing on private property, harassment, and making false statements to law enforcement. It advised me to cease all contact with the police and to retain legal counsel immediately. I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling, my stomach twisting into knots. They weren't going to help me. They were going to bury me. I called Kincaid, but his number was disconnected. I drove to Boyd's garage, but it was closed, a for sale sign hanging in the window. I was alone, completely alone. And the man in the forest knew it. That night, I parked my rig at a truck stop outside Roseburg, the same one I'd used a dozen times before. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that smile, those hollow eyes. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over, that he was still out there, still watching, still waiting, and that sooner or later he'd come for me. The next morning I found something on my windshield. A piece of paper, folded in half, tucked under the wiper. I unfolded it slowly, my hands shaking, and my blood turned to ice. It was a photograph. An old Polaroid, faded and cracked. It showed a clearing, my clearing, the one where I'd found the first bodies. But in the photograph, standing in the center of the clearing, smiling at the camera, was me. I was wearing the same jacket I'd worn that night, the same boots, and my face was frozen in an expression of terror, but I'd never posed for that photograph. I'd never even seen a camera, which meant he'd taken it, while I was there. While I was running, while I was terrified. He'd been watching me the whole time. I crumpled the photograph and threw it in the trash, but the image was burned into my mind. He knew who I was, knew where I parked, knew my routes, and he wanted me to know that he knew. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. I considered quitting, selling my rig, walking away from trucking and never looking back, but I knew it wouldn't matter. He'd find me. Wherever I went, whoever I became, he'd find me. Because that's what he did. That's what he'd always done. And I was just another name on his list. Another face in the clearing. Another person who'd seen too much and wouldn't live to tell about it. So I made a decision. If he was going to come for me, I'd be ready. I bought a dash cam, installed it myself, pointed it at the windshield and the side mirrors. I started carrying a tire iron under my seat, and I changed my routes. No more Route 138. No more forest roads. I stuck to the interstates, the busy highways, the places where there were lights and people and witnesses. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling. The feeling that I was being watched, that every time I stopped, every time I parked, every time I closed my eyes, he was out there, waiting, watching, smiling. And I knew, sooner or later, I'd see him again. Not in the forest, not on the road, but somewhere I'd never expect, somewhere I'd feel safe. And when that moment came, there'd be no running, no hiding, no escape. Just him, and me, and the dark. 3 weeks passed without incident. 3 weeks of interstate runs, busy truck stops, and sleeping with one eye open. I stuck to my new rules. No forest roads, no isolated rest areas, no stopping unless there were at least a dozen other rigs around me. I thought maybe I'd outsmarted him. Thought maybe by changing my patterns, by staying visible, I'd made myself too risky a target. But I was wrong, because men like him don't give up, they don't forget. They just wait. And on a cold November night, outside a truck stop in Grants Pass, my waiting ran out. I'd pulled in around 11, exhausted from a 16-hour haul down from Portland. The lot was packed, rigs lined up nose to tail under the harsh fluorescent lights, and I felt safer than I had in weeks. I parked between 2 other trucks, killed the engine, and did my usual sweep of the mirrors. Nothing out of place. Just tired drivers, idling engines, and the faint glow of the convenience store windows. I grabbed my duffel, locked the cab, and headed inside for a shower and some food. The facility was clean, modern, the kind of place that felt almost normal. I showered, ate a terrible microwave burrito, and tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that I was safe, that he'd moved on to someone else. But when I walked back to my rig, something was wrong. The door was unlocked. I knew I'd locked it. I always lock it. I'm obsessive about it now, checking it twice, sometimes 3 times before I walk away. But the handle turned freely when I touched it, and when I pulled it open, the dome light didn't come on. I stood there for a moment, staring into the dark cab, my heart pounding. Every instinct told me to turn around, to go back inside, to call the cops. But instead, I climbed up, reaching for the light switch. My hand found it, flipped it, and the cab flooded with light. And that's when I saw it. Sitting on my passenger seat was a folder, not the one Boyd had given me, a new one, thicker, bound with a rubber band. I picked it up slowly, my hands trembling, and slid the band off. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all Polaroids, all old, and all of me. There was one of me at a rest stop outside Eugene, taken from a distance. My back to the camera as I walked toward my truck. Another of me at a diner in Roseburg, sitting in a booth, coffee cup halfway to my lips. Another of me asleep in my cab, the curtain pulled back just enough to reveal my face. And more, so many more, each one taken without my knowledge, each one proof that he'd been following me for weeks, maybe months, maybe longer. Beneath the photographs was a handwritten note. The writing was shaky, spidery, like it had been written by someone with unsteady hands. It read, "You should have stayed on the road, Wade. Now you're part of the forest." I dropped the folder like it was on fire and stumbled out of the cab, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I looked around the lot, scanning every shadow, every gap between trucks, every dark corner. He was here, somewhere, watching me. I could feel it. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, but before the call could connect, something hit the back of my head, hard. The world spun, and I went down, my phone clattering across the asphalt. I tried to get up, but my legs wouldn't work, my vision blurred, and I could taste blood in my mouth. And then I saw boots, heavy, worn, caked in mud. They stopped right in front of my face, and I heard a voice, low, gravelly, almost amused. "You've been a lot of trouble, Wade." I tried to speak, tried to shout, but my mouth wouldn't form the words. All I could do was lay there, helpless, as rough hands grabbed me under the arms and dragged me backward, away from the lights, away from the trucks, away from safety. I could see the lot growing smaller, the glow of the fluorescents fading, and I realized he was pulling me toward the tree line, toward the forest, toward the dark. I thrashed, tried to fight, but my body felt like dead weight. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in the back of a truck, not my truck, a smaller one, a pickup. The bed was lined with plastic sheeting and my hands were bound behind my back with rope. My head throbbed, and when I tried to sit up, pain exploded behind my eyes. The truck was moving, bouncing over rough terrain, and through the gap in the tailgate, I could see trees, massive, towering trees. We were deep in the forest now, far from any road, far from any help. I tried to scream, but my throat was raw, and all that came out was a hoarse croak. The truck slowed, then stopped. I heard the driver's door open, then close, footsteps on gravel, and then the tailgate dropped with a metallic clang. He stood there, silhouetted against the pale moonlight filtering through the trees. Older than I'd thought. Frailer, but his eyes were sharp, clear, and utterly devoid of mercy. "You shouldn't have come looking," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. Most people don't. Most people see something strange and they drive on. They mind their business. But not you. You had to know, had to dig, had to make yourself a problem. He reached into the truck bed and grabbed me by the collar, hauling me out like I weighed nothing. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me, and he dragged me toward the trees. I could see orange reflectors nailed to the trunks, the same markers I'd followed before, the same breadcrumbs that had led me into this nightmare. We walked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. My legs barely worked, and I stumbled constantly, but he never let go, never slowed. He just kept dragging me deeper, the forest closing in on all sides, the darkness becoming absolute. And then we reached it, another clearing, larger than the others. And in the center was a pit, freshly dug, deep, wide enough for a body, my body. He shoved me to my knees at the edge of the pit, and I stared down into the blackness, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. "This is where you belong," he said, "with the others, the ones who couldn't leave it alone." I tried to speak, tried to beg, but he wasn't listening. He was already walking away, back toward the trees, and I realized he was leaving me here, alone, bound, in the dark. But as his footsteps faded, I heard something else, a voice, faint, coming from the pit. "Help!" It was barely a whisper, cracked and desperate. "Help me!" My blood turned to ice. Someone was down there, someone alive. I leaned forward, peering into the darkness, and I could just make out a shape. A person, huddled at the bottom of the pit, their face pale and gaunt. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The figure looked up, and even in the dark I could see the terror in their eyes. "Herschel," they said. "Herschel Kincaid." My stomach dropped. Kincaid. The driver who'd given me the map, the one whose number had been disconnected. He wasn't dead, he was here, trapped, just like me. "How long?" I asked, but he just shook his head, his lips moving soundlessly. He looked like he'd been down there for days, maybe weeks, starved, dehydrated, barely human, and I realized this was the pattern. This was how he did it. He didn't kill you right away. He let you suffer, let you starve, let you go mad in the dark, and when you finally died, he buried you and moved on to the next one. I couldn't let that happen. Couldn't let him win. I twisted my wrists, feeling the rope bite into my skin, and started working at the knots. My fingers were numb, clumsy, but I kept at it, ignoring the pain, ignoring the terror, focusing only on the rope. After what felt like an eternity, I felt the knot loosen, then slip, and then my hands were free. I pulled them around, my wrists bloody and raw, and grabbed the edge of the pit. "Kincaid," I hissed, "can you climb?" He looked at me, his eyes hollow, and shook his head. "Too weak," he whispered. I cursed under my breath and looked around. There had to be something, a rope, a branch, anything. And then I saw it, a coil of rope, half buried near the edge of the clearing. I crawled over, grabbed it, and hurried back to the pit. I tied one end around a tree trunk, tested it, and dropped the other end down to Kincaid. "Grab it," I said. "I'll pull you up." He stared at the rope like he didn't believe it was real, but then, slowly, he reached out and grabbed it. I pulled, hand over hand, my muscles screaming, my back burning. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Kincaid was heavier than he looked, or maybe I was just weaker than I thought. But inch by inch I hauled him up. His head appeared over the edge, then his shoulders. And then he was out, collapsing on the ground, gasping for air. I didn't give him time to recover. I grabbed his arm and pulled him to his feet. "We have to go," I said. "Now." He nodded. too exhausted to argue, and we stumbled into the trees. I didn't know where we were going, didn't know which direction was out, but I followed the orange reflectors in reverse, praying they'd lead us back to the road. Behind us, I heard a sound, the crack of a branch. Footsteps. He was coming back, and he was moving fast. I grabbed Kincaid and pushed him forward. "Run," I said. "Don't stop." We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes, roots catching our boots. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were made of lead, but I kept moving, kept pushing, and then I saw light. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. The road. We were close. I could hear the hum of traffic now, the sound of tires on asphalt, and it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. We burst out of the trees and onto the shoulder, and I flagged down the first vehicle I saw, a semi, just like mine. The driver pulled over, confusion and concern written all over his face, and I shouted for him to call 911. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Ambulances, state troopers, the whole circus. They took Kincaid first, loading him onto a stretcher, his body limp and unresponsive. I told them everything. The clearing, the pit, the man, the orange reflectors. And this time, they listened. They sent units into the forest following the markers, and by dawn, they'd found it. All of it. The clearings, the bodies, the camp. But the man was gone. Vanished. Like he'd never been there at all. They searched for weeks. Brought in dogs, helicopters, cadaver teams. But they never found him. And they never found any evidence that could tell them who he was. No fingerprints, no DNA, no records. It was like he was a ghost, a shadow, something that existed only in the dark. Kincaid survived, but barely. He spent 2 months in the hospital, recovering from dehydration and malnutrition. When he was finally released, he sold his rig and moved to Arizona. Said he'd never drive through Oregon again. I don't blame him. I didn't drive through Oregon for a long time either. Couldn't. Every time I saw trees, every time the road narrowed, every time the fog rolled in, I'd feel it. That cold, creeping dread. That sense that I was being watched, that he was still out there, still waiting, still hunting. Because they never found him, never caught him, never stopped him. And that means he's still doing it, still marking trails, still leaving breadcrumbs, still luring people into the forest. And nobody knows, nobody cares, nobody remembers. I eventually went back to Route 138. Had to. It's part of my route, part of my job. But I don't stop anymore. Don't pull over. Don't follow markers. I just drive. Fast. Eyes forward. Music loud enough to drown out the silence. And I tell myself that I'm safe. That he's moved on, that I'm not on his list anymore. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone on that dark stretch of highway, I'll see something in my mirror. A shape. A shadow. A figure standing on the shoulder, watching me pass. And I'll wonder if it's him. If he's still following, still waiting for the moment when I let my guard down. When I stop. When I'm alone. And when that moment comes, I know there won't be any escape. No rescue. No second chance. Just the forest. The dark. And him. Boyd's garage never reopened. I drove past it a few months later, and the building was gone. Torn down, replaced by an empty lot. No forwarding address, no phone number. Just gone, like he'd never existed. I tried calling him once, but the number was disconnected. Same as Kincaid's, same as everyone who got too close. I still have the folder he gave me. The newspaper clippings, the reports. I keep it in my truck, hidden under the bunk, and sometimes, when I can't sleep, I'll pull it out and read through it. Reminding myself that this is real, that it happened, that I'm not crazy, and that somewhere out there on a dark forest road, someone else is seeing orange reflectors. Someone else is following them. Someone else is about to discover that some roads don't lead anywhere good. They just lead deeper, into the trees, into the dark, into places you can never leave. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. Don't know if I'll ever stop looking over my shoulder. Don't know if he's forgotten about me, or if he's just biding his time. But I do know this. Route 138 is still there. The forest is still there, and so is he, waiting, watching, hunting. And if you ever find yourself on that road, late at night, and you see orange reflectors leading into the trees, do yourself a favor. Don't follow them, don't stop, don't even slow down, just keep driving. Because once you step off that road, once you follow those markers, once you see what's at the end of that trail, you become part of it. Part of the forest, part of the dark, and there's no coming back from that. I'm living proof. I got out, but I'll never really leave, because every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that clearing, back at the edge of that pit, back in the dark, and I can still hear his voice, calm, cold, final. This is where you belong, Wade, with the others. Some nights I wake up in my cab, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, convinced that I'm still there. Still in the forest, still being hunted. And I'll check the locks 3, 4, 5 times. I'll turn on every light. I'll start the engine just to feel like I can move, like I can escape. But I know the truth. I'm not escaping. I'm just delaying. Because men like him don't stop. They don't quit. They don't forget, they just wait. And sooner or later, everyone's waiting runs out. Mine almost did. And I have a feeling it's not over yet, that he's still out there, still marking trails, still watching, still smiling. And one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe next year, I'll see him again. Not in the forest, not on the road, but somewhere I least expect it. Somewhere I thought I was safe. And when that moment comes, there won't be any orange reflectors to follow. No breadcrumbs to lead me out. Just him, and me, and the dark. And this time I don't think I'll be lucky enough to escape. The weather report had called for light snow, maybe an inch or two. Nothing a seasoned driver couldn't handle. But by the time I hit the North Cascades Highway, the light snow had turned into a blizzard. The kind that doesn't just fall from the sky, but seems to come at you from every direction at once. Horizontal sheets of white that made the road disappear, and the world shrink down to nothing but the few feet of asphalt illuminated by my headlights. I was hauling furniture from Seattle to Spokane, a run I'd done maybe 200 times in the past decade. I knew this road, knew every curve, every grade, every place where the shoulder dropped off into nothing. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, the mountain was in control. My name is Gideon Brackett, and I've been driving trucks for 31 years. Started when I was 22, fresh out of a marriage that didn't last 6 months and a factory job that paid even worse. Trucking gave me freedom, gave me purpose, gave me a reason to keep moving when staying still felt like drowning. But it also gave me nights like this, nights when the road turns hostile and every mile feels like a gamble. I should have pulled over hours ago, should have stopped at that rest area outside Marble Mount and waited for the plows to clear the pass. But I was behind schedule, and my dispatcher had been writing me all week about late deliveries. So I kept going, kept pushing, kept telling myself I could make it through. The snow was coming down so hard now that my wipers couldn't keep up. They scraped back and forth across the windshield, smearing ice and slush, and every few seconds I'd have to lean forward and squint just to see the road. The temperature gauge was dropping fast. 28 degrees, then 25, then 20, and the wind was picking up, buffeting the trailer so hard that I could feel the whole rig shudder with each gust. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white, and tried to focus on the yellow line that marked the center of the road. But even that was disappearing now, buried under inches of fresh powder that made everything look the same. White, endless, disorienting. I passed a sign that read, Stevens Pass Summit, elevation 461 feet. The road here was narrow, carved into the side of the mountain, with a sheer rock wall on one side and a drop-off on the other that I couldn't see but knew was there. One wrong move, one patch of black ice, and I'd be over the edge. The thought made my stomach clench, but I pushed it away and focused on keeping the rig centered. Slow and steady, that was the key. No sudden moves, no panic, just slow and steady. But then I felt it. The back end of the trailer starting to drift, sliding to the right, toward the drop-off. I eased off the throttle and tapped the brakes, trying to correct, but the wheels had no grip. The trailer kept sliding, pulling the cab with it, and for one horrible second, I thought I was going over. I cranked the wheel hard to the left, felt the tires catch on something, gravel maybe, and the rig straightened out. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and eased the truck to a crawl, 5 miles an hour. Then 3. The blizzard was getting worse, and visibility was down to almost nothing. I couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead, and the road had disappeared completely. I was driving blind now, relying on instinct and memory, and I knew that wasn't sustainable. I needed to stop, needed to find shelter, needed to get off this mountain before I became another statistic. That's when I saw the sign. It was half buried in snow, leaning at an angle, but I could just make out the words. Ranger Station, 2 miles. I'd passed this turnoff 100 times and never given it a second thought. The station had been closed for years, abandoned after budget cuts forced the Forest Service to consolidate operations, but right now, it was the only option I had. I turned onto the access road, feeling the tires crunch through deep snow, and prayed that the road was still passable. The access road was narrow, barely wide enough for my rig, and it climbed steeply through a dense stand of evergreens. Branches scraped the sides of the trailer, and more than once I felt the wheels spin as they tried to find traction on the icy grade. But I kept going, inching forward, and after what felt like an eternity, the trees opened up and I saw it. The ranger station sat in a small clearing, a squat wooden building with a peaked roof and boarded-up windows. There was a parking area in front, big enough for maybe 3 or 4 vehicles, and I maneuvered the rig into it as best I could, pulling forward until the nose was almost touching the tree line. I killed the engine, and the silence was immediate and oppressive. No wind, no road noise, just the faint creak of the cooling engine and the soft hiss of snow falling on metal. I sat there for a moment, catching my breath, and then grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit me like a physical force. The wind had died down here, sheltered by the trees, but the temperature felt even lower than it had on the pass. My breath came out in thick clouds, and within seconds I could feel the moisture freezing on my beard. I zipped my jacket up to my chin, pulled my hood tight, and walked toward the station. The snow was knee-deep in places, and I had to high-step through it, my boots sinking with every step. The building looked even more derelict up close. The paint was peeling, the wood was warped, and one of the shutters hung loose, banging softly against the wall. But the door was solid, and when I tried the handle, it turned. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, sweeping my flashlight beam across the interior. The air smelled stale, like mildew and old wood, and it was barely warmer inside than it was outside, but at least it was dry. The main room was small, maybe 20 feet square, with a desk pushed against one wall, a couple of chairs, and a filing cabinet in the corner. There was a wood stove in the center of the room, its chimney pipe disappearing into the ceiling, and next to it was a stack of firewood, old and gray, but still dry. I walked over to the stove, opened the door, and shone my light inside. It was empty, but there were still ash and embers from the last fire, long since cold. I set my flashlight on the desk and started gathering kindling. There were old newspapers stuffed in a box under the desk, yellowed and brittle, and I crumpled them into balls and shoved them into the stove. Then I added some of the smaller pieces of wood, striking a match and holding it to the paper. The flames caught quickly, licking at the kindling, and within a few minutes I had a decent fire going. I added larger pieces of wood, closed the stove door, and adjusted the damper. The warmth was immediate and welcome, and I held my hands over the stove, letting the heat seep into my frozen fingers. As the room warmed, I took a closer look around. The desk was covered in dust, but there were still papers scattered across its surface. Old reports, requisition forms, maps of the surrounding area. I picked up one of the maps and unfolded it. It showed the ranger station, the access road, and a network of trails that snaked through the forest. Someone had marked several locations with red X's, but there was no key or legend to explain what they meant. I folded the map and set it back down, then opened the top drawer of the desk. Inside were more papers, a broken pencil, and a name tag. The tag was metal, tarnished and scratched, but I could still read the name stamped on it. E. Price, Ranger. I picked up the name tag and turned it over in my hand. Elwood Price. The name didn't mean anything to me, but seeing it made the place feel less abandoned, less empty. Someone had worked here, had sat at this desk, had filed these reports, and then, for whatever reason, they'd left, or been forced to leave. I slipped the name tag into my pocket, not sure why, and continued my search. The filing cabinet was locked, but the lock was old and rusted, and when I gave the drawer a hard yank, it popped open. Inside were dozens of folders, organized by year. I pulled out a few at random and flipped through them. Incident reports, maintenance logs, visitor complaints. Nothing unusual. Nothing that explained why the station had been abandoned. But then I found something that made me pause. It was a folder labeled Missing Persons 2009. I opened it and saw a stack of reports, each one detailing a hiker or camper who had gone missing in the area. There were at least a dozen cases, all of them unsolved. I read through a few of them, and a pattern began to emerge. All of the disappearances had occurred in the fall or winter. All of them involved people who had been hiking alone or in small groups, and all of them had last been seen somewhere along the trails that radiated out from this station. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. These weren't just random disappearances. They were clustered, concentrated, like something had been targeting this area specifically. I closed the folder and shoved it back into the cabinet, suddenly feeling like I'd intruded on something I shouldn't have. The fire crackled softly in the stove, and outside the wind had picked up again, howling through the trees. I walked over to the window and peered through a crack in the boards. The snow was still falling, heavier now, and the clearing was filling in fast. My rig was barely visible, just a dark shape against the white. I was stuck here, at least until the storm passed, and judging by the way the wind was blowing, that wouldn't be any time soon. I pulled one of the chairs close to the stove, sat down, and tried to relax. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone, or something, was watching me. The feeling grew stronger as the night wore on. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind, every shadow cast by the firelight made me tense. I told myself it was just nerves, just the isolation and the storm playing tricks on my mind. But then I heard it. A sound. Faint, but distinct. the crunch of footsteps in snow. I froze, my hand instinctively going to the tire iron I'd brought in from the truck. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, circling the building. I stood and moved to the window, pressing my eye to the crack in the boards. At first, I saw nothing, just snow and darkness. But then a shape moved across the clearing, tall, human, walking toward the station. My heart started to race. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of a blizzard? I considered calling out, asking if they needed help, but something stopped me. The way the figure moved, slow, methodical, not like someone lost or in distress, more like someone searching, hunting. The footsteps reached the door, and I heard the handle rattle. Once, twice, then stop. I held my breath. The tire iron gripped tight in my hand, and waited. The silence stretched out, thick and oppressive, and I started to think maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it had just been the wind. But then I heard it again. The handle, turning slowly, testing. And then the door swung open. The figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the pale glow of the snow. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark shape, tall and broad-shouldered. For a moment, neither of us moved. And then the figure stepped inside, and the firelight caught their face. It was a woman, maybe in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and a face weathered by years of hard living. She was wearing a thick parka, snow-covered and torn, and her eyes were wild, darting around the room like she was looking for something. Or someone. She saw me and froze, her hand going to her pocket. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice hoarse and strained. "What are you doing here?" I held up my hands, trying to show I wasn't a threat. "Name's Gideon Brackett," I said. "I'm a trucker. Got caught in the storm and needed shelter. This place was the only option." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing, and then she seemed to relax slightly. "You alone?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just me. What about you? What are you doing out here?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the stove and held her hands over it, shivering. Her fingers were pale, almost blue, and I realized she'd been out in the cold for a long time. Too long. "My name's Nadine Furlow," she said finally. "And I'm not supposed to be here." "None of us are." I frowned. "None of us? What do you mean?" She looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. Real, bone-deep fear. "You need to leave," she said. "Right now, before he comes back." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Before who comes back?" I asked, but she just shook her head. "You don't understand," she said. "This place. It's not abandoned. It's not empty. There's someone here, someone who's been here for a long time, and if he finds you, you won't leave. Just like the others." I stared at her, my mind racing. "What others?" I asked, but before she could answer, we both heard it. A sound, loud, unmistakable, the crash of a door being kicked open somewhere deeper in the building. Nadine's face went white. "He's here," she whispered. "He's back." And then she turned and ran, straight out the door and into the storm. I stood there for a second, frozen, my mind struggling to process what was happening. And then I heard footsteps, heavy, coming from the back of the building, coming toward me. I grabbed my flashlight and the tire iron and backed towards the door. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and I could see a shadow moving in the hallway that led to the back rooms. A tall shadow, broad, moving with purpose. I didn't wait to see who it was. I turned and ran out into the snow, following Nadine's tracks. The storm had worsened, and the wind was so strong now that it nearly knocked me off my feet. But I kept running, my boots slipping in the deep snow, my lungs burning from the cold. Behind me, I heard the door slam open again, heard the footsteps in the snow, and I knew, without looking back, that whoever it was, they were following me. And they were faster than I was. I could see Nadine ahead, just a dark shape against the white, and I pushed harder, trying to catch up. But the snow was too deep, and I was too slow. I stumbled, went down hard, and the flashlight flew from my hand, disappearing into the drifts. I scrambled to my feet, blind now, and kept running. The footsteps behind me were closer, so close I could hear the ragged breathing, feel the presence, and I knew that if I stopped, if I slowed down even for a second, it would be over. Nadine disappeared into the trees, and I followed, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at my jacket. The wind howled through the branches, and the darkness was absolute. I couldn't see where I was going, couldn't see anything. I just kept moving, kept running, and prayed that I wouldn't hit a tree or step off a cliff. And then, suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I was falling, tumbling through the air, and then I hit something hard, and everything went black. I woke up to pain, sharp, immediate, radiating from my left shoulder and down my arm. My head throbbed, and when I tried to open my eyes, everything was blurry, doubled, spinning. I lay there for a moment, trying to remember where I was, what had happened, and then it came back in fragments. The station, Nadine, the footsteps, the chase, the fall. I forced my eyes open and looked around. I was lying at the bottom of a ravine, maybe 15 feet deep, surrounded by rocks and fallen branches. Snow was still falling, lighter now, and the sky above was a pale gray that suggested dawn wasn't far off. My shoulders screamed when I tried to move it, and I realized I'd dislocated it in the fall. I'd done it once before, years ago, and I remembered the feeling. The grinding. The wrongness. I sat up slowly, biting back a groan, and assessed the damage. My jacket was torn, my jeans were soaked through, and I'd lost one of my gloves somewhere in the snow. But I was alive. That was something. I looked up at the edge of the ravine, trying to figure out how I'd get back up, and that's when I saw her. Nadine. She was standing at the top, looking down at me, her face pale and drawn. For a moment, I thought she might leave, just turn around and disappear into the trees, but then she started climbing down, moving carefully, using the rocks and roots for handholds. When she reached the bottom, she crouched next to me and looked at my shoulder. "You're hurt," she said. It wasn't a question. "Dislocated," I said, through gritted teeth. "Can you pop it back in?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I've done it before, but it's going to hurt." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Can't hurt worse than it already does." She positioned herself behind me, one hand on my shoulder, the other gripping my wrist. "On 3, she said. 1, 2. She didn't wait for 3. She yanked my arm hard, and I felt the joint snap back into place with a sickening pop. The pain was blinding, white hot, and I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. But then, just as quickly, it faded to a dull ache. I flexed my fingers, testing, and nodded. "Thanks," I said. She stood and offered me her hand. I took it, letting her pull me to my feet, and we both stood there for a moment, catching our breath. "We need to move," she said. "He'll be looking for us." I nodded, even though every part of me wanted to just sit down and rest. "Who is he?" I asked. "And why the hell is he chasing us?" Nadine didn't answer right away. She started climbing back up the ravine, and I followed, using my good arm to pull myself up. When we reached the top, she paused and looked back toward the station. The building was barely visible through the trees, just a dark shape against the snow. "His name is Elwood Price," she said finally. "He was a ranger here, worked this station for almost 20 years. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The name tag, the one I'd found in the desk. "Was?" I asked. "What happened to him?" Nadine started walking, and I fell into step beside her. "He disappeared in 2009, she said. "Same year all those hikers went missing. The Forest Service launched an investigation, but they never found anything. No body, no evidence. Just a station full of reports and a ranger who'd vanished into thin air. Eventually, they shut the place down and moved on. But some of us knew the truth, knew what really happened." She stopped and looked at me, her eyes hard. "Price didn't disappear. He never left. He's been here the whole time, living in the forest, hunting." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Hunting? Hunting what?" She gestured toward the trees. "People, hikers, campers, anyone who wanders too close to the station. He brings them back, keeps them, and when he's done with them, he buries them somewhere out here where nobody will ever find them." My stomach turned. "How do you know all this?" I asked. "How do you know it's him?" Nadine's expression darkened. "Because I was one of them," she said. "One of the ones he took. Back in 2009. I was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail with my sister. We stopped at the station to refill our water, and Price offered to show us a shortcut, said it would save us half a day. We followed him into the forest, and that's when he turned on us." She paused, her jaw working like she was chewing on something bitter. "He had a gun. Made us walk for hours, deeper and deeper into the mountains. My sister tried to run, and he shot her, just like that. Didn't hesitate. Didn't say a word. Just pulled the trigger and kept walking. I thought I was next. Thought he'd kill me too. But he didn't. He brought me to a cabin, old, falling apart. And he locked me inside. Kept me there for 3 days, no food, no water. Just darkness and cold. And then, on the 4th day, he just left, didn't say why, didn't explain. He just walked out and never came back." I felt sick. "How did you get out?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. "I broke a window. Cut myself pretty bad, but I didn't care. I just ran until I found a road, and then a ranger patrol picked me up. I told them everything. Told them about Price, about my sister, about the cabin. But when they went looking, they couldn't find it. Couldn't find her body. Couldn't find any evidence that what I said was true. They thought I was crazy. Thought I'd made it up. Eventually, they stopped looking. Stopped caring. And I was left with nothing but nightmares and questions." We walked in silence for a while, the snow crunching under our boots. The forest was quiet now, the storm finally starting to ease. But the silence felt oppressive, like the trees themselves were listening. "So, why are you back here?" I asked. "If he's still out here, why would you come back?" Nadine stopped walking and turned to face me. "Because I need to know," she said. "Need to know what happened to my sister. Need to find her body. Need to prove that I wasn't crazy. That it really happened. I've been coming back every year since 2009. Searching. Looking for the cabin. Looking for any sign of her. And last night I finally found something." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of fabric. It was torn, faded, covered in dirt and blood, but I could still see the pattern. A flower print. Delicate, feminine. "This was hers," Nadine said, her voice breaking. "My sister's. I found it near the station, which means she's close, which means he buried her somewhere nearby, and I'm not leaving until I find her." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her to give up, to leave this place and never come back. But I could see in her eyes that she wouldn't. Couldn't. This wasn't just about closure. It was about justice. about making sure her sister wasn't forgotten, and I understood it better than I wanted to admit. "All right," I said. "Then we find her, together. But first, we need to get somewhere safe. Figure out a plan, because wandering around in the forest with a homicidal ex-ranger hunting us is a good way to end up dead." Nadine nodded, and we started moving again. We stayed off the main trails, sticking to the dense undergrowth where the snow wasn't as deep and our tracks would be harder to follow. After about an hour, we came to a clearing. In the center was a small structure, not a cabin, more like a shed, made of weathered wood and corrugated metal, half buried in snow. Nadine approached it cautiously and I followed. The door was unlocked, hanging loose on its hinges, and when we stepped inside, I saw that it had been used recently. There was a sleeping bag in the corner, folded neatly, a camp stove, canned food stacked on a makeshift shelf, and on the wall, illuminated by the pale morning light filtering through the cracks in the metal, was a map. It was hand-drawn, crude but detailed, showing the ranger station, the surrounding trails, and several locations marked with red X's. I walked over to the map and studied it. The X's were clustered in a rough circle around the station, each one labeled with a date. 2009, 2011, 2013, 2015, and more recent ones. 21-23. "What is this?" I asked, but I already knew. Nadine stood beside me, her face pale. "Burial sites," she said. "He's been marking them, keeping track." I counted the X's. There were 14 of them, 14 people, 14 lives. 14 families who would never know what happened to their loved ones. My hands clenched into fists, and I felt a surge of anger so strong it made my vision blur. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about stopping him, about making sure he couldn't do this to anyone else. "We need to document this," I said. "Take pictures, get proof, and then we get the hell out of here and call the police. Real police, not local rangers. State police, FBI, someone who will actually do something." Nadine pulled out her phone, but the screen was cracked, and when she tried to turn it on, nothing happened. "Dead," she said. "Battery's gone." I reached for my own phone, but I already knew it was pointless. I'd lost it in the fall, or maybe before that. Either way, it was gone. "All right," I said. "Then we do this the old-fashioned way. We memorize the locations, and we get out of here alive." I pulled the map off the wall, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my jacket. And that's when I heard it. A sound, faint, coming from outside, the crunch of snow. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the shed. Nadine's eyes went wide and we both froze. The footsteps stopped right outside the door, and I could see a shadow moving across the gap at the bottom. Someone was there, standing just on the other side of the thin metal wall, listening, waiting. I grabbed the tire iron I'd been carrying and moved to the side of the door, pressing myself against the wall. Nadine did the same on the opposite side. The seconds stretched out, each one feeling like an eternity. And then the door swung open. The man who stepped inside was tall, gaunt, with a long gray beard and eyes that were sunken and hollow. He was wearing a ranger uniform, faded and stained, and in his hand was a revolver, old, well-maintained, and pointed directly at where Nadine had been standing just moments before. He scanned the interior of the shed, his movements slow and methodical, and when he didn't see us, he stepped further inside. I didn't give him a chance to react. I swung the tire iron as hard as I could, aiming for his gun hand. The metal connected with a sickening crack, and the revolver went flying, skittering across the floor. He let out a roar of pain and spun toward me, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. Elwood Price. The man from the name tag. The man who'd been dead for 15 years. Except he wasn't dead. He was right here, right in front of me. And he was furious. He lunged at me and I barely managed to sidestep, bringing the tire iron up again. But he was faster than he looked. He grabbed my wrist, twisting hard, and the tire iron fell from my grip. His other hand came up, fingers clawing for my throat, and I felt his grip tighten. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I just reacted. I drove my knee up into his gut as hard as I could. Once. Twice. He grunted, but didn't let go. His face was inches from mine and I could smell him. Decay. Sweat. Madness. And then Nadine was there. She'd grabbed the revolver from where it had fallen, and she pressed the barrel against the side of his head. "Let him go," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Or I swear to God I'll put a bullet in your skull." For a moment, Price didn't move, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. And then, slowly, he released his grip. I stumbled back, gasping for air, and Nadine kept the gun trained on him. "Outside," she said. "Move." Price smiled. It was a cold, dead smile, the kind that made my skin crawl. "You won't shoot me," he said. "You don't have it in you." Nadine's jaw tightened. "Try me." He laughed, a low, rasping sound, and then he turned and walked out of the shed. We followed, staying a safe distance behind, the gun never wavering. Outside, the storm had finally stopped, and the sky was clearing. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the snow. Price stood in the center of the clearing, his hands at his sides, his expression unreadable. "You think you've won," he said, looking at Nadine. "You think finding that map means something, but it doesn't. Those people? They're gone, forgotten, and nobody cares. Nobody ever cared. That's why I did it, because I could. Because nobody was watching. Nobody was paying attention. And when you're gone, when you're just another name on a missing persons list, nobody will care about you either." Nadine's hand shook, and for a moment, I thought she might actually pull the trigger. But then she lowered the gun. "We're not going to kill you," she said. "We're going to make sure you rot in a cell for the rest of your life." Price's smile widened. "You'll never make it off this mountain," he said. And then he turned and ran, straight into the forest. Nadine raised the gun, but I grabbed her arm. "Don't," I said. "Save the bullets, we might need them." She nodded, and we both stood there watching him disappear into the trees. "What now?" she asked. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The station was to the west. My rig was parked there. If we could make it back, if the engine would start, we could get out of here. "We go back," I said. "Get to my truck, and we don't stop until we're off this mountain." The walk back to the station took longer than I expected. The snow had stopped completely now, and the sun was climbing higher, turning the forest into a blinding expanse of white. But the temperature was still brutal, and every step felt like walking through wet concrete. My shoulder ached with every movement, and I could feel exhaustion creeping into my bones. Nadine walked beside me, the revolver tucked into her belt, her eyes constantly scanning the trees. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. We both knew what we were walking into. Price was still out there, still hunting, and he knew these woods better than we ever would. We reached the clearing where the station sat just after noon. My rig was exactly where I'd left it, half buried in snow, but still intact. The sight of it filled me with a relief so intense it almost made my knees buckle. That truck was my lifeline, my way out, my ticket back to civilization. I pulled the keys from my pocket and hurried toward it, Nadine close behind. But as we got closer, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The front tires were flat. Both of them, slashed, deep cuts that left the rubber hanging in strips. I walked around to the other side, already knowing what I'd find. The rear tires were the same, 4 flat tires, 4 deliberate cuts. Price had been here, had sabotaged my rig while we were out in the forest. Son of a bitch, I muttered, kicking one of the ruined tires. Nadine came up beside me, her face grim. "He knew we'd come back here," she said, "knew we'd try to leave." I looked at the station, then back at the rig. Without functional tires, the truck was useless, a 40-ton paperweight, but maybe there was still something I could use. I climbed up into the cab and started searching. The CB radio was dead. I tried the ignition, and while the engine turned over, it wouldn't do me any good without tires. I checked the glove box, under the seats, behind the panel, and then I found it. A flare gun. Old. Probably left by the previous driver, but still loaded. I grabbed it along with 3 spare flares and climbed back down. "Not much," I said, showing Nadine. "But it's something." She nodded. "Better than nothing." I looked around the clearing, trying to think. We couldn't stay here. Price knew where we were, and it was only a matter of time before he came back. But we also couldn't just wander into the forest. Not without supplies. Not without a plan. "The station," I said. "We need to go back inside, find a radio, a phone, anything that can get us in contact with the outside world." Nadine hesitated. "He might be in there," she said. "Waiting." I hefted the flare gun. "Then we'll be ready." We approached the station carefully, moving in silence, every sense on high alert. The door was still open, swinging slightly in the breeze, and the fire I'd built earlier had long since gone out. I stepped inside first, the flare gun raised, and swept the room. Empty. The desk, the filing cabinet, the stove. Everything was just as I'd left it, but something felt different. Wrong. And then I saw it. The papers on the desk had been moved, rearranged, and written across one of them in thick black marker was a message. "You shouldn't have come back." Nadine saw it too, and I heard her breath catch. "He was here," she whispered, "while we were gone." I nodded, my grip tightening on the flare gun. "Then we don't have much time. Search the place, find anything we can use, radio, phone, weapons, anything." We split up, Nadine taking the back rooms while I focused on the main office. I tore through the filing cabinet again, this time looking for anything that might help. Emergency protocols, contact numbers, radio frequencies. But most of the files were old, outdated, useless. And then I found something. A logbook. Dated 2009. The same year the disappearances started. The same year Price vanished. I flipped it open and started reading. The entries were mundane at first. Weather reports, visitor logs, maintenance notes. But as I got deeper, the tone changed. The handwriting became erratic, desperate, and the entries themselves became darker. Another one went missing today. Hiker, male, early 30s. Last seen on the North Ridge Trail. Search party found nothing. How is that possible? How do people just vanish? And then a few pages later, I know what's happening. I've seen him. Out in the forest. Watching. Waiting. But nobody believes me. They think I'm losing it. Maybe I am. Maybe this place is making me crazy. And finally, the last entry, dated October 14th, 2009. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. People are dying. And I'm the only one who knows why. I'm going to find him. Going to stop him. Even if it means I don't come back. The entry ended there. No signature, no follow-up. Just those final words, and then nothing. I closed the logbook, my hands shaking. This wasn't Price's doing, or at least not entirely. He'd been investigating the disappearances, had seen something, someone, and then he'd gone into the forest and never returned, which meant there was someone else, someone who'd been here even longer, someone who'd turned Price into what he was now. Gideon, Nadine's voice, sharp and urgent, cut through my thoughts. I dropped the logbook and hurried to the back room. She was standing in front of a door I hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a stack of storage boxes. The door was open, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. "What is this?" I asked. Nadine shook her head. "I don't know, but look." She pointed to the wall next to the door. Scratched into the wood, barely visible, were words. Dozens of them, names, dates, messages. "Help us. He's down there. Don't go in." And at the bottom, carved deeper than the rest, Elwood Price, 2009. My blood ran cold. "He was trapped down there," I said. "Someone locked him in." Nadine nodded. "And whatever's down there, it's still there." We both stared at the staircase, the darkness yawning up at us like a mouth. Every instinct told me to close the door, to leave this place and never look back. But I couldn't, because if there were answers down there, if there was proof of what had happened, then I needed to see it. Needed to know. "I'm going down," I said. Nadine grabbed my arm. "That's insane." I looked at her. "You came back here to find your sister, to find the truth. So did I, and I think the truth is down there." She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we go together." I pulled out my flashlight, tested it, and started down the stairs. They were steep, narrow, and creaked with every step. The air grew colder as we descended, and I could smell something. Damp earth, mildew, and something else, something rotten. The stairs ended in a narrow corridor carved out of stone, with wooden beams supporting the ceiling. There were doors along the corridor, each one marked with a number, 1 through 6. I approached the first door and tried the handle. Locked, same with the second, and the third. But the fourth door was open, swinging slightly on its hinges. I pushed it open and shone my light inside. The room was small, maybe 10 feet square, with a dirt floor and stone walls. And in the center, lying on the ground, was a body. I stepped inside, forcing myself to look closer. The body was old, decomposed, barely recognizable, but I could see the remnants of clothing, hiking gear, and a backpack, still strapped to the skeletal remains. Nadine came up beside me, her hand over her mouth. "Is it her?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. "No, my sister was wearing different clothes." I moved to the backpack and carefully unzipped it. Inside were personal effects, a wallet, an ID card. I pulled it out and read the name. Daniel Kelton, age 27. One of the missing hikers from the files I'd seen upstairs. We moved to the next room, another body, and the next, each one a victim. Each one someone who'd come to this mountain and never left. By the time we reached the 6th door, I'd counted 5 bodies. 5 people who'd been locked down here and left to die. Nadine was pale, her breathing shallow, and I could see her struggling to keep it together. "We need to get out of here," she said. "We need to get help." I nodded, but before we could move, I heard something. A sound, faint, coming from further down the corridor, beyond the 6th door. I turned and saw that the corridor didn't end. It kept going, sloping downward, disappearing into the darkness. And from somewhere deep in that darkness came the sound again, a voice. Low, rasping, barely human. "Nadine." The voice called her name, and she froze, her eyes wide. "That's impossible," she whispered. "That's her. That's my sister." Before I could stop her, she was running, down the corridor, into the darkness. I cursed and ran after her, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, and in the center, illuminated by a single shaft of light from a crack in the ceiling, was a cage. Makeshift, constructed from metal poles and wire. And inside the cage, huddled against the far wall, was a woman. She was emaciated, her clothes hanging off her frame, her hair matted and filthy. But when she looked up, I saw her face, and I saw the resemblance. She had Nadine's eyes, Nadine's nose. This was her sister. "Katie!" Nadine's voice broke, and she rushed to the cage, grabbing the wire, shaking it. "Katie, it's me. It's Nadine. I'm here. I'm going to get you out." Katie stared at her, and for a moment there was no recognition, just emptiness. But then her eyes focused, and she started to cry. "Nadine?" she whispered. "Is it really you?" Nadine nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, it's me. I'm here. I'm going to get you out." I moved to the cage and examined the lock. It was old, rusted, but solid. I'd need tools to break it, or a key. "Where's the key?" I asked Katie. She shook her head. "He has it. He always has it." "Who?" I asked, but I already knew. "Price?" Katie shook her head again. "No, not Price, the other one. The one who brought us here, the one who keeps us." My stomach turned. "There's someone else?" Katie nodded. "He lives down here, in the dark. He's been here for years, decades. He brought Price down here first, kept him locked up, drove him mad, and then he let him go, sent him up to the surface to bring more people to feed him." I looked at Nadine, and I saw my own horror reflected in her eyes. Price wasn't the one running this operation. He was just a puppet, a hunter bringing prey back to his master. "Where is he?" I asked Katie. "Where is this other person?" She pointed deeper into the chamber, toward another tunnel I hadn't noticed. "In there? That's where he sleeps. That's where he keeps the ones who try to escape." I felt a chill run down my spine. "How many are there?" I asked. "How many people are still alive down here?" Katie's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know," she whispered. "I've lost count." I turned to Nadine. "We're getting her out of here right now." I grabbed the lock and pulled, using all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. I tried shooting the flare gun at it, but the lock held. Frustrated, I looked around for something, anything I could use as a tool, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps, coming from the tunnel Katie had pointed to. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Nadine heard it too, and she grabbed my arm. "We need to go," she said. "Now." But I couldn't leave Katie. Couldn't leave her locked in this cage after everything she'd been through. "I'm not leaving her," I said. The footsteps grew louder, and I could see a shape emerging from the tunnel. Tall, hunched, moving with an unnatural gait, and behind it I could see others, more shapes, more figures, all of them moving toward us. "Gideon, we have to go," Nadine said, her voice rising. "We can't fight them, not all of them." I looked at Katie, and she looked back at me, and in her eyes I saw acceptance. She knew we couldn't save her, not right now, not without help. "Go," she said. "Get help. Come back, please." I nodded, my throat tight, and grabbed Nadine's hand. We ran, back through the corridor, back up the stairs, back into the station. Behind us, I could hear them, the footsteps, the voices, growing louder, getting closer. We burst out of the station and into the clearing, and I slammed the door behind us, wedging a piece of wood under the handle to keep it shut. It wouldn't hold for long, but it would buy us time. "What now?" Nadine asked, gasping for breath. I looked around, my mind racing. My rig was useless, the station was compromised, and we had no way to call for help. But we had one thing: the flare gun. "We signal for help," I said. "We fire the flares and hope someone sees them." I loaded the flare gun and aimed it at the sky. The flare shot up with a loud whoosh, arcing high above the trees before exploding in a brilliant red starburst. Then I fired another and another, 3 flares, 3 desperate signals. And then we waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, and I could feel hope slipping away. And then I heard it, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. Faint at first, but growing louder. I looked up and saw it. A search and rescue chopper, painted bright orange, sweeping across the valley. I grabbed the last flare and fired it, and the chopper banked hard, heading straight for us. It landed in the clearing, snow whipping up in a blinding cloud, and 2 paramedics jumped out. "Are you injured?" one of them shouted over the noise of the rotors. "We're fine," I shouted back. "But there are people down there, in the station, underground. They need help." The paramedic nodded and spoke into his radio. Within minutes, more helicopters arrived. Police, Forest Service, medical teams. They swarmed the station, and I watched as they carried Katie out on a stretcher, alive but barely. Nadine ran to her, sobbing, and they held each other as the medics worked. I stood there, numb, watching the controlled chaos unfold around me. They found the other bodies, brought them up, counted them, and then they went deeper into the tunnels, looking for the others, looking for him. But they never found him. Whoever he was, whatever he was, he'd vanished. Disappeared into the mountain like a ghost. They found evidence, tools, supplies, a crude living space carved into the rock. But no person. No answers. Just more questions. Price was found 3 days later, frozen to death in a ravine about 5 miles from the station. The autopsy showed signs of prolonged malnutrition and exposure. He'd been living in the forest for years, surviving on whatever he could scavenge. But the real question, the one nobody could answer, was who had done this to him. Who had turned a dedicated ranger into a monster, and where that person was now. They kept me for 3 days. First at a hospital in Wenatchee, then at a police station in Seattle. Doctors checked my shoulder, my vitals, made sure I wasn't suffering from hypothermia or shock. Detectives asked questions. Hundreds of them. What did you see? Who did you see? Can you describe them? When did you first notice something was wrong? I answered as best I could, but the truth was I didn't have answers. Not the ones they wanted. I'd seen shapes in the dark, heard voices, found bodies, but the person responsible, the one pulling the strings, had vanished like smoke, and that seemed to frustrate them as much as it terrified me. Nadine was in a different room, giving her own statement. I didn't see her again until the 4th day, when they finally released us. She looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, like she hadn't slept since we'd come down from that mountain. We met in the parking lot of the station, neither of us quite sure what to say. Her sister Katie was still in the hospital, stable but traumatized, and the doctors said it would be months before she'd be ready to talk about what had happened to her. If she ever was. "Thank you," Nadine said finally, "for not leaving her, for helping me find her." I nodded. "I'm just glad she's alive." Nadine looked down at her hands. "The police don't believe half of what we told them. They think we're exaggerating, making things up. They found the bodies, sure. But the tunnels? The cage? They think Price did it all, that there was no one else, I felt a surge of frustration. We both saw him, heard him. He was real. Nadine nodded. I know. But without proof, without a body, they can't do anything. They've closed the case, ruled it as Price acting alone. And now they're telling us to move on, to forget. I looked at her, and I could see the same anger in her eyes that I felt. What are you going to do? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to stay with Katie, help her recover, and then, when she's ready, we're leaving Washington, going somewhere far away from these mountains, somewhere we can forget. She paused. What about you? I thought about my rig, still sitting up on that mountain, tires slashed, useless. Thought about the life I'd built driving those roads. And I realized I didn't want it anymore. Didn't want to be alone in the dark, wondering what was watching me from the trees. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe I'll do the same. Find a new route, a new job, something that doesn't take me through places like that. Nadine reached out and squeezed my hand. Take care of yourself, Gideon. And then she walked away, and I watched her go, feeling like I was saying goodbye to more than just a person. I was saying goodbye to the part of me that thought I understood the world. That thought I knew what was out there in the dark. Because now I knew better. Now I knew that some places aren't meant to be understood. They're just meant to be avoided. I took a bus back to Spokane and spent a week in a cheap motel, trying to figure out my next move. My dispatcher called twice, asking when I'd be back on the road. I told him I needed time, told him I'd been through something and wasn't ready. He didn't push, didn't ask questions, just said to call when I was ready, but I wasn't sure I ever would be. I kept thinking about that station, about the tunnels, about the figure I'd seen emerging from the darkness, and the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that it wasn't over. That whatever had been down there was still out there, still hunting, still waiting. 3 weeks after I got back, I received a package. No return address, just my name and the motel address written in neat, careful handwriting. I opened it and found a folder inside, the same folder I'd seen in the shed, the one with the map, the one showing all the burial sites. But there was something new. A photograph. It was a Polaroid, old and faded, showing the ranger station, and standing in front of it, smiling at the camera, were 2 people. One was Elwood Price, younger, clean-shaven, wearing his ranger uniform. The other was a man I didn't recognize. Older, tall, with hollow eyes and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. On the back of the photograph, written in the same careful handwriting, was a message. He's still watching. My blood ran cold. I turned the photograph over again, staring at the man's face, trying to memorize every detail. And then I noticed something. In the background, barely visible behind them, was another figure, standing in the shadow of the trees, watching. I grabbed my phone and called the detective who'd handled my case, told him about the package, about the photograph. He said he'd look into it, told me not to worry, told me it was probably just someone trying to scare me. But I could hear the doubt in his voice, the uncertainty. He didn't believe it was over either. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the motel bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of traffic outside. And I kept thinking about the photograph, about that figure in the trees, about the message. He's still watching. I got up, turned on all the lights and sat by the window, watching the parking lot, watching the shadows, watching for any sign that I wasn't alone. But nothing moved, nothing happened. And eventually, as the sun started to rise, I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the trauma, just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew better. I stayed in Spokane for another month, taking odd jobs, trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy. I avoided the mountains, avoided the forests, stuck to the cities, the highways, the places with lights and people. But I couldn't escape the feeling. That sensation of being watched, of being followed. I'd be walking down the street and suddenly feel eyes on me. I'd turn around and there'd be nothing, just crowds and cars and normalcy. But the feeling never went away. It was always there, lurking at the edge of my awareness, reminding me that I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see, that I knew something I wasn't supposed to know. One night, I was at a truck stop outside Spokane, having dinner and trying to read the paper when I saw her, Nadine. She was sitting in a booth on the other side of the restaurant, alone, staring at a cup of coffee like it held the answers to everything. I almost didn't approach her, almost convinced myself to just leave. But something made me walk over. "Nadine?" I said. She looked up, and for a second she didn't recognize me. But then her eyes widened, and she nodded. "Gideon, what are you doing here?" I gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Mind if I sit?" She shook her head, and I slid into the booth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Nadine said, "Katie died 2 weeks ago." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What? How?" Nadine's eyes were dry, but I could see the pain in them, raw, fresh. They said it was her heart. Said the trauma, the malnutrition, the years of captivity had damaged it too much. She just went to sleep one night and didn't wake up. She looked down at her hands. But I don't think that's what killed her. I think she gave up. I think she realized that even though her body was free, her mind was still trapped down there. In that cage, in the dark, and she couldn't live with that. I didn't know what to say. There were no words that could make this better. No platitudes that could ease that kind of pain. So I just sat there, silent, and let her talk. "I got a package too," she said after a while. "About a week before she died. Same as yours, I'm guessing. A photograph, a message." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and slid it across the table. I unfolded it and saw another Polaroid. This one showed Katie, sitting in the cage, looking up at the camera with hollow, terrified eyes. And behind her, barely visible in the shadows, was the same figure, the same man, watching. On the back was written, "She never left." I felt sick. "Did you show this to the police?" Nadine nodded. "They said it was fake, said someone was using photo editing software to mess with us. They told me to ignore it, to move on." She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that scared me. Desperation. Obsession. But it's not fake, is it? He's real, and he's still out there. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it was over, that we were safe. But I couldn't, because I didn't believe it myself. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Nadine folded the photograph and put it back in her pocket. "I'm going back," she said. "Back to the station, back to the tunnels, and I'm going to find him. I'm going to make him pay for what he did to Katie, for what he did to all of them." I stared at her, trying to find the words to talk her out of it. But before I could speak, she stood up. "You don't have to come," she said. "I know you've been through enough, but I need you to know. I need you to understand. I'm not stopping, not until he's dead or I am." And then she walked out, leaving me sitting there alone. I should have let her go, should have walked away and never looked back. But I couldn't, because I knew what it felt like to need answers, to need closure, to need justice. And I knew that if she went up there alone, she'd die, just like Katie, just like all the others. So I paid my bill, grabbed my jacket, and followed her. We drove up the mountain in her truck, neither of us speaking. The road was clear now, the snow melted, the pass open, but the forest still felt hostile. Still felt like it was waiting for us. We reached the station just after midnight, and I was surprised to see it was still standing, still intact. The door was boarded up, covered with warning signs and police tape, but Nadine tore them down without hesitation. We stepped inside, and I half expected to find it empty, abandoned, but it wasn't. The desk was still there, the filing cabinet, the stove, and on the wall, written in fresh black marker, was a message, "Welcome back." Nadine pulled out a flashlight and walked toward the back room, toward the door that led to the tunnels. I followed, every instinct screaming at me to turn around, to run, but I didn't. We descended the stairs, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, and reached the corridor. The doors were all open now, the bodies removed by the police. But the sixth door, the one that led deeper into the mountain, was still closed. Nadine reached for the handle, but I grabbed her wrist. "We don't know what's down there," I said. "We don't know if he's alone, if there are others." She looked at me, and I saw no fear in her eyes, just determination. "I don't care," she said, and she opened the door. The tunnel beyond was longer than I remembered, darker, and as we walked, I realized the walls were covered in carvings, names, dates, messages scratched into the stone by desperate hands. "Help, please. I want to go home." And at the end of the tunnel, we found the chamber. The same chamber where we'd found Katie, but the cage was gone now, removed by the police. And in its place was something else, a structure, built from bones and wood and wire, some kind of altar, and in the center of it, sitting cross-legged, was a man. The same man from the photograph. He was older now, his hair white, his skin like parchment. But his eyes were the same, hollow, empty, watching. "You came back," he said, his voice rasping like sandpaper on stone. Nadine raised her flashlight and I saw her hand was shaking. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man smiled. "I've had many names, but you can call me the Keeper. I keep this place, I keep the mountain, I keep the lost." He gestured to the carvings on the walls. "They all come here eventually, looking for something, running from something. And I give them what they need. I give them peace." Nadine's voice was tight with anger. "You killed my sister. You killed all those people." The Keeper shook his head slowly. "I didn't kill them. The mountain did. I just helped them find their way home." I felt rage building in my chest. "You're insane." The Keeper looked at me, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes. Recognition. "You're the one who escaped," he said. "The one who broke the pattern. I've been waiting for you to come back. Knew you would. They always do." He stood, and I realized he was holding something. A knife. Long. Old. Stained. "The mountain demands balance," he said. "You took one of mine. Now I take one of you." And then he moved. Fast. Faster than someone his age should have been able to. He lunged at Nadine, the knife flashing in the beam of the flashlight. But she was ready. She sidestepped, and I heard the crack of a gunshot. The Keeper stumbled, clutching his chest, and fell to his knees. Nadine stood over him, the revolver in her hand, smoke curling from the barrel. "That's for Katie," she said, and then she fired again, and again, until the gun clicked empty. The Keeper collapsed, blood pooling beneath him, his eyes staring up at nothing. For a moment, we just stood there, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. And then I heard it. A sound coming from deeper in the tunnels. Voices, whispering, chanting. And I realized we weren't alone. There were others, more of them, living down here in the dark. Serving the mountain, serving him. "We need to go," I said, grabbing Nadine's arm. "Now!" We ran, back through the tunnel, back up the stairs, back into the station, and behind us I could hear them following, not chasing, just following. Like they knew we couldn't escape, like they knew we belonged here now. We burst out of the station and into the clearing, and I saw headlights. A truck, my truck, repaired, tires replaced, sitting right where I'd left it. I didn't question it, didn't think. I just ran to it, Nadine beside me, and we threw ourselves inside. I cranked the engine, and it roared to life. I threw it into gear and punched the gas, and we tore out of that clearing like demons were chasing us. And maybe they were. We didn't stop until we hit the highway, didn't speak until we were miles away from the mountain. And even then, all Nadine said was, "Is it over?" I looked at her, and I wanted to say yes, wanted to tell her that we'd won, that we'd killed the monster and everyone could sleep easy now, but I couldn't, because I knew the truth. I'd seen it in the keeper's eyes, in the carvings on the walls, in the voices that followed us. This wasn't over. It would never be over. The mountain was alive, and it was hungry, and it would keep taking people, keep luring them in, keep feeding, no matter how many keepers we killed, no matter how many bodies we found. It would never stop. Nadine never drove those mountains again. She moved to Arizona, got a job teaching, tried to build a new life. I heard she got married a few years later, had kids, found some measure of peace. I hope that's true. I hope she escaped, but I don't think she did. I think she's like me, marked, changed, forever looking over her shoulder, wondering if the mountain is calling her back. As for me, I'm still driving, still hauling loads across the country. But I avoid Washington now, avoid the Cascades, avoid any road that takes me too close to that place. And when I have to drive through mountains, through forests, through places where the trees press in and the darkness feels thick, I don't stop, don't rest, don't even slow down, because I know what's out there, know what's watching, know what's waiting. 3 months ago, I got another package, another photograph. This one showed the ranger station, empty, abandoned. But in the window, barely visible, was a face, pale, watching, and on the back, in that same careful handwriting, "The mountain remembers." I burned the photograph, burned the folder, burned everything connected to that place, but it didn't help, because I can still feel it. That pull, that call, telling me to come back, telling me I left something unfinished. And I know, deep down, that one day I will go back, not because I want to, but because I have to, because the mountain won't let me go until it has what it wants, until it takes what's owed. I see them sometimes, in truck stops, in diners, in parking lots. People who look lost, people who look haunted, people with that same hollow look in their eyes that Nadine had, that Katie had, that I have. And I wonder if they've been to the mountain too, if they've seen what I've seen, if they're running like I'm running. But I never ask, never speak to them, because I know the answer wouldn't change anything, wouldn't make it better, wouldn't make it stop. The mountain is patient, the mountain is eternal, and the mountain always gets what it wants. Elwood Price learned that. Katie learned that. And someday, I'll learn it too. But until that day comes, I keep driving, keep moving, keep running, because that's all I can do. That's all any of us can do. Run and hope that we're fast enough, hope that we're lucky enough, hope that when the mountain finally calls us home, we have the strength to say no. But I don't think I will. I don't think any of us will, Because the mountain doesn't just take your body, it takes your soul, your will, your hope. And once it has those, once it's marked you as its own, there's no escape, there's no freedom, there's only the road, the darkness, and the slow, inevitable pull back to the place where it all began, back to the tunnels, back to the cage, back to the mountain. And when I finally go back, when I finally can't resist anymore, I wonder what I'll find. Will Nadine be there? Will Katie? Will all the lost souls who've been taken over the years be waiting for me in the dark? I don't know, but I do know this. The ranger station is still there, the tunnels are still there, and somewhere in those tunnels, in the deepest, darkest part of the mountain, something is still alive. Still watching, still waiting. And it knows my name, it knows my face, and it knows that sooner or later I'll come back. Because we all come back. The mountain makes sure of that. And when we do, when we finally give in and walk back into that darkness, we don't come out again. We just become part of it, part of the mountain, part of the endless hunger that can never be satisfied. That's what I think about every time I drive through a mountain pass. Every time I see a ranger station, every time the road gets dark and lonely and the trees press in close, I think about the mountain, and I wonder if tonight's the night. If this is the road that will lead me back. If this is the moment I finally stop running. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight, I keep driving, keep the pedal down, keep my eyes on the road ahead, and I try not to look in the mirrors. Try not to see what might be following me. Try not to hear the voice in the back of my mind, whispering, calling, telling me it's time to come home. Because once I listen, once I turn around, once I give in, it's over. And I'm not ready for it to be over. Not yet. Not ever. So I drive, and I hope, and I pray that the mountain forgets about me, that it finds someone else, that it lets me go. But deep down, I know the truth. The mountain never forgets. The mountain never lets go. And one day, whether it's tomorrow or 10 years from now, I'll find myself on that road again, driving toward those mountains, driving toward that station, driving toward the darkness. And when that day comes when I finally can't run anymore, I'll walk back inside, back down the stairs, back into the tunnels, and I'll join all the others who couldn't escape, who couldn't say no, who couldn't resist the call, and the mountain will finally have what it wanted all along. Highway 299 cuts through some of the most isolated country in Northern California. Dense redwood forests that block out the sun during the day and turn the road into a tunnel of absolute darkness at night. I've been running this route for 8 years, hauling produce from Redding to the coast, and I know every mile marker, every turnout, every place where the cell signal drops to nothing. It's a lonely road, the kind where you can drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle. The kind where if something goes wrong, you're on your own. That's what I was thinking about on the night of September 19th, 2023, when I came around a bend and saw the rig. My name is Thatcher Gaines, 42 years old, divorced, no kids, just me and my Peterbilt, hauling loads up and down the California coast. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and keeps me moving. Keeps me from thinking too much about the life I left behind in Sacramento, the marriage that fell apart, the house I couldn't afford, the career I walked away from. Trucking gave me a fresh start, a way to disappear into the miles and the hours and pretend that none of that other stuff mattered. But some nights, like this one, the isolation gets to me, makes me wonder if disappearing was the right choice, if maybe I should have stayed and fought instead of running. The rig was parked on the shoulder about a quarter mile ahead. hazard lights flashing in the darkness. At first, I thought it was just another driver taking a break or dealing with a mechanical issue. Nothing unusual. But as I got closer, something felt off. The trailer was sitting at a strange angle, like it had been pulled over in a hurry. The cab door was open, hanging loose, and I could see the dome light was on, but there was no one around. No driver, no movement. Just the truck, sitting there in the dark, hazards blinking like a distress signal. I eased off the throttle and pulled up behind it, leaving my own hazards on and my engine running. Standard procedure. Never shut down your rig until you know what you're dealing with. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped down from the cab, the cool night air hitting me like a wall. It was late September, and the temperature had already dropped into the 50s. My breath came out in faint clouds, and I could hear the sounds of the forest around me. Crickets, wind rustling through the redwoods, the distant hoot of an owl. But no human sounds, no voices, no footsteps. I walked toward the abandoned rig slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and called out, "Hey, anybody here? You need help." Nothing, just my own voice echoing back to me, thinner and weaker than it should have been. I reached the cab and shone my light inside. The interior was a mess, papers scattered across the floor. A thermos tipped over, coffee staining the seat. The keys were still in the ignition, and the engine was cold. Whoever had been driving this thing had left in a hurry, or been taken. I backed away from the cab and walked around to the trailer. It was a standard dry van, unmarked, with no company logos or identifying information. The rear doors were closed, but not locked. The padlock was hanging loose like someone had opened it and never bothered to secure it again. I stood there for a moment, debating. Every instinct told me to get back in my truck and call the highway patrol, let them deal with it. But curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the padlock free, unlatched the doors, and swung them open. The smell hit me first, sharp, chemical, with an underlying sweetness that made my stomach turn. I covered my nose and mouth with my jacket and shone my flashlight inside. The trailer was mostly empty. A few wooden crates stacked near the front, some tarps piled in the corner. And in the center, illuminated by my flashlight beam, was a chair. Heavy, metal, bolted to the floor, and attached to the chair were restraints. Thick nylon straps, the kind you'd use to secure cargo. But these weren't securing cargo, they were securing a person. Or they had been. The straps were cut, hanging loose, and on the floor beneath the chair was blood, dark, fresh, pooled in the ridges of the metal flooring. My hands started to shake, and I had to grip the flashlight tighter to keep it steady. This wasn't an abandoned truck. This was a crime scene, and whoever had been in that chair, whoever had been bleeding, was gone, either escaped or taken. Either way, I was standing in the middle of something I didn't understand, something dangerous. I backed out of the trailer, my heart pounding, and pulled my phone from my pocket. No signal. Of course. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees that blocked everything. I looked around, scanning the forest, the road, the shadows, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. In the dirt on the shoulder, leading away from the truck. Into the trees, 2 sets, one larger, heavier, dragging slightly. The other, smaller, lighter, but erratic, like someone running or being chased. I followed the prints with my flashlight and they disappeared into the undergrowth about 20 feet from the road. I knew I should wait, should get in my truck and drive until I found a signal. But something made me follow, made me need to know what had happened, who had been in that chair, where they were now. I stepped off the road and into the forest, my boots crunching on fallen branches and pine needles. The trees here were massive, towering redwoods that blocked out the sky and made the darkness feel absolute. My flashlight beam seemed weaker here, swallowed by the black, and I had to move slowly to avoid tripping on roots and rocks. The footprints were harder to follow now, but I could still see them. Scuff marks in the dirt, broken branches. And then, about 50 yards in, I found something else, a shoe, small, women's, covered in mud and torn at the heel. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and felt a chill run down my spine. Someone had been running through here barefoot, running from something, or someone. I kept moving, deeper into the forest, and the sounds around me seemed to change. The crickets went quiet. The wind died down. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it, a sound, faint, coming from somewhere ahead. It was a voice, low, pained, calling for help. I moved toward it, faster now, my flashlight sweeping back and forth, and I saw her. She was sitting with her back against a tree, one leg stretched out in front of her, the other bent at an unnatural angle. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her face bruised and swollen, and her hands were still bound with the same nylon straps I'd seen in the trailer. She looked up at me, and I saw fear in her eyes, raw, primal, the kind of fear that comes from being hunted. "Please," she whispered, "please help me." I dropped to my knees beside her and started working at the straps. They were tight, cutting into her wrists, and it took me a moment to loosen them. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're safe now. I'm going to get you out of here." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, you don't understand. He's still out there. He's coming back." I froze, my hands still on the straps. "Who? Who's coming back?" She looked past me, into the darkness, and I saw her whole body start to tremble. "The driver," she said. "The man who took me. He's hunting me. He said if I ran, he'd make it worse. He said he'd make me wish I'd stayed in the chair." I got the straps off and helped her to her feet, but she couldn't put weight on her injured leg. I slung her arm over my shoulder and started back toward the road, moving as quickly as I could. "How long ago did he leave?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. He went back to the truck to get something, a weapon, I think, and I ran. I just ran." We were maybe halfway back to the road when I heard it. The sound of branches breaking. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from behind us. I glanced back, my flashlight beam cutting through the trees, and I saw him. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket and jeans, and in his hand was something long and metallic. A crowbar, or a tire iron. He was maybe 30 yards away, moving steadily, and he wasn't running. He didn't need to. He knew the forest. Knew we couldn't outrun him. "Go," the woman whispered. "Leave me. Just go." I shook my head. "I'm not leaving you." I adjusted my grip on her and started moving faster, half dragging her through the undergrowth. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were made of lead, but I kept going. Behind us, the footsteps grew louder, closer, and then I heard his voice. "You shouldn't have interfered." It was calm, almost conversational, like he was talking about the weather. "This doesn't concern you. Walk away now, and I'll let you live." I didn't respond, didn't slow down. I just kept moving, my eyes locked on the faint glow of my hazard lights through the trees. We were close now, maybe 50 feet. If I could just get her to the road, get her in my truck, we could drive away, get help. But the man was right behind us now. So close, I could hear his breathing, feel his presence, and then the woman stumbled. Her injured leg gave out, and she went down, pulling me with her. I hit the ground hard, the flashlight flying from my hand, and I heard him laugh. Low, satisfied. "You tried," he said. "I'll give you that." I scrambled to my feet, putting myself between him and the woman, and grabbed the only thing I could find. A branch. Thick. Heavy. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. He stopped a few feet away, the tire iron resting on his shoulder, and looked at me. His face was unremarkable. Average. The kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. But his eyes were different. Cold, empty. The eyes of someone who'd done this before. Who'd do it again. "You're making a mistake," he said. "She's mine. I paid for her. Bought her fair and square, and nobody takes what's mine." I felt sick. "She's not property," I said. "She's a person." He smiled. "Not anymore." And then he moved, fast. Faster than I expected. He swung the tire iron at my head, and I barely managed to duck. The metal whooshed past my ear, and I swung the branch connecting with his ribs. He grunted, stumbled back, but didn't go down. I swung again, aiming for his head, but he blocked it with the tire iron, and the branch shattered. He grabbed me by the collar and threw me backward, and I hit a tree hard enough to see stars. I was on the ground, dazed, trying to get up, when I heard the sound. A gunshot, sharp, deafening. It echoed through the forest, and for a moment everything went still. The man froze, the tire iron raised, and looked down at his chest. There was a hole there. Small, red, spreading. He dropped the tire iron and fell to his knees, his hands pressing against the wound, and then he toppled forward and didn't move. I looked up and saw the woman. She was standing, leaning against a tree, a revolver in her hand. Small. Old. The kind you'd keep in a glove box for emergencies. "I took it from the truck," she said, her voice shaking, "when he wasn't looking. I've been carrying it the whole time." I got to my feet, my head still spinning, and walked over to the man. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. He was dead. I looked at the woman, and she was staring at the body, the gun still in her hand, her expression blank. "Is he the only one?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "I think so. I never saw anyone else, just him." I took the gun from her gently and tucked it into my jacket. "We need to get out of here, get to my truck, call the police." She nodded again, and I helped her back toward the road. We moved slowly, carefully, and when we finally reached the shoulder, I could see my rig sitting there, hazards still flashing, engine still running. I helped her into the passenger seat and climbed in after her. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I drove for maybe 5 miles before I found a turnout with a signal. I pulled over, grabbed my phone, and called 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I told her everything. The abandoned truck, the trailer, the chair, the blood, the man, the woman, the shooting. She told me to stay where I was, that units were on the way, that I'd done the right thing. But as I sat there, waiting, watching the woman in my passenger seat stare out the window with those hollow, traumatized eyes, I didn't feel like I'd done the right thing. I felt like I'd stumbled into something I didn't understand. Something that was far from over. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 patrol cars, lights flashing, followed by an ambulance. They took the woman first, loading her onto a stretcher and asking her questions she could barely answer. Then they came for me. A deputy, middle-aged, with tired eyes and a notebook. He introduced himself as Reuben Lyle and asked me to walk him through what had happened. I told him everything, showed him the abandoned truck, the trailer, the chair, the blood. He wrote it all down, his expression unreadable, and when I finished, he closed his notebook and looked at me. "You're lucky to be alive," he said. "This guy, The one who's dead. We've been looking for him for 2 years. He's connected to at least 6 disappearances, maybe more. But we could never prove it, could never find the bodies. I felt a chill. 6? Lyle nodded. Young women. All of them last seen hitchhiking or walking alone on rural highways. All of them vanished without a trace. We suspected human trafficking, but we didn't have evidence, until now. He looked back at the trailer. This changes everything. We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow. Give a full statement. But for tonight, you can go, just don't leave the area. I nodded, climbed back into my truck and sat there for a long moment, trying to process what he'd said. 6 women. 6 lives. And the one I'd saved was just one of how many? How many others had been in that trailer? How many others had sat in that chair? How many others hadn't been lucky enough to escape? I drove to a motel in Weaverville and checked in for the night. But I didn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The abandoned truck, the blood, the woman's face, the man's empty eyes. And I kept thinking about what Lyle had said, that they'd been looking for him for 2 years, that there were at least 6 victims. And I wondered how many truckers had driven past that rig and never stopped, how many had seen it and kept going, how many had chosen not to get involved. And I realized that if I'd done the same, if I'd just called the highway patrol and kept driving, that woman would be dead, and nobody would ever know what had happened to her. The next morning, I drove to the sheriff's station in Weaverville. It was a small building, brick and concrete, tucked between a hardware store and a diner. Deputy Lyle was waiting for me in an interview room, a cup of coffee in front of him and a thick folder on the table. He gestured for me to sit, and I did, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. I hadn't slept more than an hour, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw that chair, those straps, the blood on the floor. "Coffee?" Lyle asked, but I shook my head. He opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed the woman I'd rescued, cleaned up now, her face less swollen, her eyes clearer. "Her name is Iris Hollander," he said. 28 years old, from Eureka. She went missing 3 weeks ago, disappeared while walking home from work. I stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile the battered, terrified woman I'd found in the forest with the smiling face looking back at me from the picture. "How is she?" I asked. Lyle's expression was grim. "Physically, she'll recover. Broken ankle, some bruising, dehydration, but mentally?" He shook his head. "That's going to take a lot longer. She's been through hell. What that man did to her, what he was planning to do, it's the kind of thing that stays with you forever." He pulled out more photographs. Crime scene photos, the trailer, the chair, close-ups of the restraints, and then photos of other women, 6 of them, all young, all smiling in their pictures, all missing. "These are the other victims we know about," Lyle said. "All disappeared within the last 2 years, all from small towns along Highway 299 or Highway 36. All of them vanished without a trace. No witnesses, no evidence. Just gone." He tapped one of the photos. "This is Marcy Dutton, age 23, disappeared 14 months ago outside Hayfork. Her car was found abandoned on the shoulder, keys in the ignition, phone on the seat, just like the others." He moved to the next photo. "This is Leslie Brandt, age 19. Vanished 8 months ago near Mad River. Last seen accepting a ride from a trucker at a gas station. Nobody got a plate number, nobody got a good look at the driver." I felt sick. "You think the same guy took all of them?" Lyle nodded. "We're sure of it. Same M.O., same hunting ground. And now that we've got his body, we can run DNA, fingerprints, see if we can connect him to any of the scenes. But Gaines, I need to be straight with you. The man you killed last night, we don't know who he is. No ID, no wallet, no registration on the truck. His fingerprints aren't in any database. It's like he doesn't exist. I stared at him. How is that possible? Lyle leaned back in his chair. Because he was careful. Professional. This wasn't some random psychopath grabbing women on impulse. This was organized, planned. He had a system, a network, and I think he was working with others. The room suddenly felt colder. Others? Lyle pulled out another photograph. This one showed the interior of the trailer, but from a different angle. And on the wall, barely visible in the shadows, were marks. Scratches. Words carved into the metal. We found these when we processed the scene, Lyle said. Messages from the victims. Names, dates, pleas for help. He pointed to one of the carvings. It read, "They're watching, they know." Below it was another, not just him, others everywhere. I felt a chill run down my spine. What does that mean? Lyle shook his head. We don't know. But Iris said something similar when we interviewed her. She said the man who took her wasn't working alone, that there were others, a group, and they were using the highways as hunting grounds. I sat back, trying to process what he was saying. You're telling me there's a trafficking ring operating on these roads? Lyle nodded slowly. That's what we think. But we don't have proof. Not yet, all we have are suspicions. Patterns. And now, thanks to you, we have a witness. Someone who survived. Someone who can tell us what's really going on. He looked at me, his eyes hard. Which is why I need your help. I frowned. My help? I'm just a driver. I don't know anything about investigations. Lyle leaned forward. But you know the roads. You know the truckers. You know the stops, the routes, the rhythms. And you're someone they'll talk to. Someone they'll trust. We've been trying to infiltrate this network for months, but we can't get close. Every time we send someone undercover, they're made within days. But you're legitimate. You're one of them. I shook my head. You want me to spy on other truckers? That's insane. Lyle's jaw tightened. 6 women are dead, Gaines, maybe more, and there are probably others out there right now, locked in trailers just like Iris was, being transported to God knows where. If we don't stop this, if we don't find out who's behind it, more people are going to die, and you're the only person in a position to help us. I wanted to say no, wanted to walk out of that room and never look back. But I couldn't, because he was right. If I didn't help, if I just went back to my route and pretended none of this had happened, more women would disappear. More families would be left wondering. And I'd spend the rest of my life knowing I could have done something and chose not to. What do you need me to do? I asked. Lyle pulled out a map and spread it across the table. It showed Northern California, with Highway 299 and Highway 36 highlighted in red. There were marks along the routes, circles, X's, clusters of activity. We think the network operates along these corridors, Lyle said, using truck stops, rest areas, and remote turnouts as transfer points. The victims are grabbed, held for a short period, and then moved, sometimes across state lines, sometimes to buyers. We don't know the full scope, but we think it's bigger than just 1 or 2 people. We think it's organized, coordinated, and we think truckers are at the center of it. He pointed to several truck stops marked on the map. These locations have been flagged as potential hotspots, high traffic, minimal security, perfect for moving people without being noticed. What we need is someone on the inside, someone who can monitor these stops, watch for suspicious activity, and report back. You'd be our eyes and ears. You wouldn't have to confront anyone or put yourself in danger. Just observe, and if you see something, you call me." I studied the map, my mind racing. And if they figure out what I'm doing? Lyle's expression was grim. "Then you get out. Fast. These people are dangerous, Gaines. They've killed before and they'll kill again. But I don't think they'll suspect you. You're just a driver doing his job. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening." I nodded slowly, even though every instinct was screaming at me to refuse. "How long?" Lyle shrugged. "As long as it takes. Could be days, could be weeks. But every piece of information you give us gets us closer to shutting this down." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. Small, prepaid. "Use this to contact me. Don't use your personal phone. Don't discuss this with anyone. And if you see something, anything that feels off, you call immediately, day or night. I'll answer." I took the phone, turned it over in my hands, and slipped it into my jacket. "I'll do it," I said, "but I want something in return." Lyle raised an eyebrow. "What?" I looked him in the eye. "I want to talk to Iris. I want to hear her story. I want to know what she went through. Because if I'm going to risk my life doing this, I need to understand why." Lyle was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I'll arrange it." 2 hours later, I was sitting in a hospital room, waiting. The walls were pale green, sterile, and the air smelled like disinfectant and sadness. Iris was in the bed, her leg elevated, her hands wrapped in bandages. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile, like a strong wind could blow her away. When she saw me, she tensed, and I saw fear flash across her face. "It's okay," I said quickly. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just wanted to see how you were doing. Make sure you were okay." She relaxed slightly, but her eyes stayed wary. "You're the one who found me," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm Thatcher. Thatcher Gaines." She studied me for a long moment, then gestured to the chair beside the bed. "Sit." I did, and for a while neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "Thank you for stopping, for helping me. Most people wouldn't have." I shook my head. "I couldn't just drive past." She laughed, a bitter sound. "Most do. That's how we got away with it for so long. People see things, strange things, but they don't stop, don't ask questions. They just keep driving." She looked down at her hands. "I was one of them once. I saw a woman being dragged into a truck at a rest stop outside Reading. She was screaming, fighting, and I just sat there, watched. And then I drove away, told myself it wasn't my problem, that someone else would help." Her voice broke, and I saw tears streaming down her face. 2 weeks later, I saw her picture on the news. Missing. Presumed dead. And I realized I could have saved her, should have saved her, but I didn't. I was too scared, too selfish. And then, 3 weeks ago, it was my turn. I was walking home from work, and a truck pulled up beside me. The driver asked if I needed a ride. Said he was heading my way. I said no, but he insisted. And when I turned to walk away, he grabbed me, dragged me into the cab. And that was it. My life was over. She wiped her eyes. He kept me in that trailer for 3 weeks. Barely fed me. Barely gave me water. Just kept me tied to that chair, waiting. And every day, he'd come in and tell me about the others. The women he'd taken before me. What he did to them, where he sold them, how much they were worth. I felt sick. He sold them? Iris nodded. That's what he said. He worked for someone, a broker, someone who arranged the sales. He'd grab women off the highways, hold them for a few days, and then deliver them to buyers. Rich men, criminals, people who wanted slaves. He said I was worth $10,000, said I'd fetch more if I stayed quiet and didn't fight. She looked at me, her eyes hollow. He was going to deliver me the night you found me. Was driving to a meeting point somewhere near the coast. But then I got the door open, got the restraints loose, and I ran. I knew he'd kill me if he caught me, but I didn't care. I'd rather die running than live like that. I didn't know what to say. There were no words that could make this better, no comfort I could offer. So I just sat there listening and let her talk. The deputy said you want to help, she continued, that you're going to try to find the others, the ones who are still out there. I nodded. I'm going to try. She reached out and grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Be careful. These people, they're everywhere. Truckers, dispatchers, even cops. He told me that, said they had people in every state, people who looked the other way, people who helped. And if you cross them, they'll kill you. They won't hesitate, they won't care. You'll just be another body on the side of the road. I squeezed her hand gently. I'll be careful. She held my gaze for a moment longer, then let go. I hope so, because I don't want to see your picture on the news. I left the hospital feeling heavier than when I'd arrived. Iris's words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the image of her sitting in that chair, waiting to be sold, waiting to disappear. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and sat there for a long moment, staring at the prepaid phone Lyle had given me. This was real. This was happening. And I was now part of it, whether I liked it or not. I spent the next 2 days running my regular route, but everything felt different now. Every truck I passed, I wondered if the driver was involved. Every rest stop, I scanned for signs of suspicious activity. Every conversation with another trucker felt loaded, like they were sizing me up, trying to figure out if I knew something. And maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was seeing threats where there were none. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere, someone knew what I was doing, and they were waiting for me to make a mistake. On the 3rd day, I pulled into a truck stop outside Reading. It was one of the locations Lyle had marked on the map, a known hotspot. I parked my rig, killed the engine, and walked inside. The place was busy, filled with drivers grabbing coffee, checking their phones, talking shop. I ordered a sandwich and sat in a corner booth, watching, listening. And that's when I saw him. A driver, older, maybe in his 60s, with a weathered face and cold eyes. He was sitting at a table near the back, talking to another man. Younger. Nervous. And between them, on the table, was a photograph. I couldn't see it clearly, but I caught a glimpse. A woman, young, dark hair. And written on the back, in neat handwriting, was a number. $15,000. My blood ran cold. I pulled out the prepaid phone and took a picture, zoomed in as much as I could, and sent it to Lyle. Then I stood, paid for my sandwich, and walked out. I didn't look back, didn't draw attention, just got in my truck and drove. But as I pulled out of the lot, I glanced in my mirror, and I saw the older driver standing at the entrance watching me. His eyes locked on mine, and he smiled. Not a friendly smile, a knowing smile. The kind that said, I see you, I know what you're doing, and you just made a mistake. I drove for 2 hours straight, checking my mirrors every few seconds, convinced I was being followed. Every pair of headlights behind me felt like a threat. Every truck that passed felt like it was sizing me up, calculating, planning. By the time I pulled into a rest area outside Red Bluff, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I parked under the brightest light I could find, killed the engine, and sat there, breathing hard, trying to calm down. The prepaid phone buzzed in my pocket, A text from Lyle. Got your photo. Running facial recognition on both men. Stay alert, don't approach, report only. I typed back a quick response. One of them saw me, I think I'm blown. The reply came almost instantly. Get somewhere public, stay visible. I'm sending a unit to your location. But the unit never came. I waited for an hour, watching the parking lot, watching the road, but no patrol car appeared. I tried calling Lyle, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried texting again. Nothing, just silence. And that's when I realized I was on my own. Whatever net I'd stirred up, whatever hornet's nest I'd kicked, I was in it alone. I thought about driving straight to the sheriff's station. Thought about abandoning the truck and catching a bus out of California. Thought about 100 different ways to get out of this. But I knew it wouldn't matter. If these people were as connected as Iris said, if they really had people everywhere, then there was nowhere I could go that they wouldn't find me. I was marked now, tagged, and the only way out was through. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. I needed to keep moving, needed to stay ahead of whoever was coming, but I also needed information, needed to understand what I was up against, and there was only one person who might be able to help. Iris had mentioned a broker, someone who arranged the sales, someone at the top of the chain. If I could find that person, if I could get proof of what they were doing, maybe I could take down the whole network, or maybe I'd just get myself killed. Either way, I had to try. I pulled out the map Lyle had given me and studied the marked locations. One stood out. A truck stop called Rusty's, about 40 miles east of Redding. It was circled in red with a note. High activity, multiple sightings, possible hub. I set my GPS and drove. The highway was empty now, just me and the darkness and the endless stretch of asphalt. The radio played soft country music, and I tried to focus on that instead of the fear gnawing at my gut. But every few miles I'd see headlights in my mirror. Sometimes they'd fall back, sometimes they'd stay close, and I couldn't tell if it was paranoia or if I really was being followed. By the time I reached Rusty's, it was past midnight. The lot was half full. Rigs parked in neat rows, engines idling, drivers sleeping in their cabs. I pulled in slowly, scanning for anything unusual. And that's when I saw it. The same truck from the photograph, the one with the $15,000 note. It was parked in the far corner, away from the lights, trailer doors open. I parked a few rows over, close enough to watch but far enough to avoid suspicion. I killed the engine, cracked my window, and waited. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Just the hum of idling engines and the occasional cough of a diesel exhaust. And then I saw movement. 2 figures emerged from the trailer. The older driver I'd seen at the truck stop, and another man, taller, younger. They were carrying something between them. A large duffel bag. Heavy, moving in a way that suggested weight and bulk. They loaded it into the back of a van parked nearby, closed the doors, and climbed inside. The van pulled out slowly, headlights off, and disappeared onto the access road. I grabbed the prepaid phone and took pictures. The truck, the license plate, the van, everything I could. And then I made a decision. I was going to follow them. I fired up the engine, pulled out of the lot, and trailed the van at a distance. It headed east, away from the highway onto a series of back roads that wound through the hills. The terrain here was rough, covered in scrub brush and scattered pine trees, and the roads were narrow, potholed, barely maintained. I kept my headlights off, relying on the moon and the faint glow of the van's taillights to guide me. After about 15 miles, the van turned onto a dirt road. I followed, my heart pounding, and after another mile, I saw lights. A compound, surrounded by a chain-link fence, guard shack at the entrance, and inside, several buildings, warehouses, offices, and parked along the perimeter more trucks, at least a dozen of them. I pulled over about a quarter mile from the entrance, killed the engine, and grabbed my phone. I tried calling Lyle again. Still voicemail. I sent him the coordinates, the photos, everything I had, and then I waited. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized no one was coming. If I wanted answers, if I wanted proof, I was going to have to get it myself. I climbed out of the cab, grabbed my flashlight, and started toward the compound on foot. The fence was tall, topped with barbed wire, but there was a gap near the back where the wire had been cut. I squeezed through, tearing my jacket in the process, and moved into the shadows. The compound was quiet, but I could see lights on in one of the buildings, and through the windows, I could see movement. People. Talking. Working. I crept closer, staying low, using the trucks for cover. When I reached the building, I pressed myself against the wall and peered through the window. Inside was an office. Large. Furnished with desks and filing cabinets. And seated at one of the desks was a woman. Late 40s, well-dressed. She was on the phone, and even though I couldn't hear what she was saying, I could see the authority in her posture. The control. This was the broker, I was sure of it. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Captured her face. The interior of the office. The stacks of folders on the desk. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the wall behind her was a map. Large, detailed, showing highways across California, Oregon, Washington. And marked along those highways were pins. Red pins, dozens of them, each one labeled with a name and a date. I zoomed in, trying to read the names, and I saw them. Marcy Dutton, Leslie Brandt, the missing women Lyle had shown me, and more, so many more. This wasn't just a trafficking operation. This was an industry, a network that stretched across 3 states, coordinated, organized, and far bigger than I'd imagined. I kept recording, my hands shaking, and that's when I heard it. A voice behind me. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, and there he was, the older driver, the one who'd seen me at the truck stop. He was holding a gun, small, black, pointed directly at my chest. "Drop the phone," he said. I hesitated, and he cocked the hammer. "Drop it, now." I let the phone fall to the ground, and he stepped forward, kicking it away. "You made a big mistake, friend, sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." I held up my hands. "I'm just a driver. I don't want any trouble." He laughed. "Too late for that. You're in the middle of trouble. And now you're going to disappear, just like all the others." He gestured with the gun. "Walk toward the warehouse." I walked, my mind racing, trying to think of a way out. But there wasn't one. Not with a gun at my back. Not surrounded by fences and guards. I was trapped. He marched me across the compound and into one of the warehouses. Inside, the air was cold and smelled like oil and metal. There were rows of crates stacked floor to ceiling, and in the center of the room was a chair. The same kind I'd seen in the trailer. Metal, bolted to the floor, with restraints. "Sit," the driver said. I shook my head. "No." He pressed the gun against my temple. "Sit, or I'll put a bullet in your brain right now." I sat. He secured the restraints around my wrists and ankles, pulling them tight enough to cut into my skin. And then he stepped back, admiring his work. "You know, you're not the first person to try to play hero," he said. "We've had cops, journalists, even a few truckers like you. All of them thought they could take us down. All of them ended up in a ditch somewhere." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Yeah, it's me. We've got a problem. That driver from the truck stop, the one who took the pictures. He's here, at the compound." A pause. "Yeah, I know. I'll handle it. But the boss needs to see him first. Wants to make sure he didn't send the photos to anyone." He hung up and looked at me. "You're lucky. Most people don't get to meet the boss. But you're special. You killed one of ours, and that requires a personal touch." I didn't respond. Didn't give him the satisfaction. I just sat there testing the restraints, trying to find any weakness. But they were solid. Professional. I wasn't getting out without help, and help wasn't coming. The driver leaned against a crate, gun still trained on me, and we waited. After about 10 minutes, the door opened, and the woman from the office walked in. Up close, she was even more intimidating. Tall, cold, with eyes that looked like they'd seen everything and felt nothing. She stopped a few feet away from me and studied me like I was an insect under glass. "Thatcher Gaines," she said. My name on her lips made my skin crawl. 42 years old, divorced, no kids, drives for a small logistics company out of Sacramento, unremarkable in every way, except for one night you decided to be a hero. She walked closer. "You saved Iris Hollander, killed one of my best hunters, and then you had the audacity to work with the police, to spy on us, to think you could take us down." She laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "Do you have any idea how many people have tried? How many have failed? We're not some backwoods operation, Mr. Gaines. We're a business, a very profitable business, and we have resources, connections, protection at every level, local cops, state troopers, even federal agents. Everyone has a price. Everyone can be bought. And the ones who can't?" She gestured to the chair. "Well, they end up here." I found my voice. "You're not going to get away with this. Lyle knows, the sheriff's department knows, I sent them everything." She smiled. "Deputy Lyle, yes. He's been a thorn in our side for months. So dedicated, so righteous, but also so predictable. Did you really think we didn't know he was using you? That we didn't see you coming the moment you walked into his office?" My stomach dropped. "What did you do?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. It was Lyle, slumped in his car, eyes closed, a bullet hole in his temple. "He won't be helping anyone anymore," she said, "and neither will you." She nodded to the driver, and he stepped forward, raising the gun. But before he could pull the trigger, the warehouse door exploded inward. Gunfire erupted, loud, deafening. The driver went down, blood spraying across the concrete. The woman dove behind a crate, and I saw figures pouring in. Men in tactical gear, FBI vests, DEA, Homeland Security. And leading them, limping but alive, was Lyle. His arm was in a sling, his face bruised, but he was alive. He saw me and moved toward the chair, pulling a knife from his belt and cutting the restraints. "You're okay," he said. "You're going to be okay." I stared at him, trying to process. "I thought you were dead. She showed me a photo." He pulled me to my feet. "That was her brother. Looked just like me. She tried to throw you off, make you think you had no backup. But we've been watching this place for weeks, waiting for the right moment, and you gave it to us." The woman was on the ground now, hands zip-tied behind her back, agents surrounding her. She looked up at me, and even in defeat there was no fear in her eyes, just cold calculation. "This doesn't end," she said. "You think taking me down stops it? There are others, always others. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering who's watching, wondering who's next." Lyle grabbed her by the arm and hauled her to her feet. "Save it for the judge." He looked at me. "We need to get you out of here, get you checked out, debriefed." I nodded, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the map on the office wall. All those pins, all those names. What about them? I asked. The women, the victims. What happens to them? Lyle's expression was grim. We'll do everything we can. Follow every lead. But Gaines, you need to understand. Most of them are already gone. Sold, shipped out of state, out of the country. We'll find some, save some, but not all. I felt a weight settle over me. Heavy. Suffocating. Then what was the point? What did any of this accomplish? Lyle put a hand on my shoulder. You saved one, Iris, and because of you, we took down a major hub, arrested 15 people tonight, seized records, names, routes. This network is going to crumble. It's going to take time, but it's going to crumble. And that's because of you. I wanted to feel relief, wanted to feel like a hero, but all I felt was exhaustion, and the nagging sense that this wasn't over, that somewhere out there, another truck was rolling down another highway, another woman was being taken, another life was being destroyed. The FBI processed the scene for hours. I sat in the back of an ambulance wrapped in a blanket, giving my statement to a dozen different agents. They asked the same questions over and over, and I answered mechanically, my mind elsewhere. When they finally let me go, it was almost dawn. Lyle drove me back to my truck, still parked at Rusty's. What now? I asked. He shrugged. Now you go home. Take some time off. Process what happened. And when you're ready, you come back. Keep driving, keep living, because that's how you win. You don't let them take that from you. I nodded, but I didn't believe him, because I knew the truth. They'd already taken something from me. They'd taken my peace, my sense of safety, my ability to look at another trucker without wondering. I climbed into my cab, started the engine, and drove. Back to Sacramento. Back to my apartment. Back to a life that felt foreign and empty. Iris called me a week later. She'd been released from the hospital and was living with her sister in Eugene. I wanted to thank you again, she said. For everything. I heard what you did, how you helped bring them down. You saved a lot of people, Thatcher. I didn't feel like I'd saved anyone. How are you doing? I asked. There was a long pause. I'm alive, she said finally. That's something. But I don't sleep much. Don't go outside unless I have to. I see his face everywhere. In crowds, in cars, in my dreams. The doctors say it'll get better. That time heals, but I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. I understood, because I felt the same way. If you need anything, I said. If you ever want to talk, you have my number. She thanked me and hung up. And I sat there, in my empty apartment, staring at the phone, wondering if either of us would ever really be okay. I went back to work 2 weeks later, took a short haul down to Los Angeles. Easy route. Well-lit highways, plenty of traffic. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling. The constant awareness, the hypervigilance. Every rest stop felt like a trap. Every parked truck felt like a threat. And every time I saw a woman walking alone, I wondered if she was next. If I'd drive past and later see her face on the news, another missing person, another statistic. 3 months after the raid, I received a package. No return address, just my name and apartment number written in neat, careful handwriting. I opened it slowly, half expecting something terrible. But inside was a letter, handwritten. It was from one of the women they'd rescued. She didn't give her name, but she thanked me. Said that because of what I'd done, she'd been found, saved, reunited with her family. She said she was going to therapy, learning to trust again, learning to live again. And she wanted me to know that I'd made a difference, that I'd given her a second chance. I read the letter 3 times, and for the first time since that night in the warehouse, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope, small, fragile, but real. But that hope didn't last long, because a week later I was at a truck stop outside Bakersfield, and I saw him. A driver, middle-aged, unremarkable. But his eyes, I'd seen those eyes before. Cold, empty, calculating. He was talking to another man, and between them, on the table, was a photograph. I couldn't see it clearly, but I didn't need to. I knew what it was. The network hadn't crumbled. It had adapted, reorganized, and it was still operating, still hunting, still taking. I pulled out my phone to call Lyle, but then I remembered. He'd been reassigned, moved to a different department, given a desk job after what happened. The new deputy handling the case didn't know me, didn't trust me, told me to stay out of it, to let the professionals handle it. But I couldn't, because I'd seen too much, known too much. And I realized that this was my life now, not just driving, but watching, listening, looking for the signs, the patterns, the faces that didn't belong. I'd become something I never wanted to be, a hunter hunting hunters. And I didn't know if I'd ever stop. Didn't know if I'd ever be able to look at another truck, another driver, another highway, without wondering what was hiding in the shadows. Iris was right. The mountain remembers. The road remembers. And once you've seen what's really out there, once you've stared into that darkness, you can never unsee it. You just learn to live with it, learn to carry it, and hope that someday it doesn't crush you. I still drive Highway 299, still haul loads up and down the coast, but I'm different now, changed. I don't listen to music anymore, don't let my mind wander. I stay alert, stay focused, and every time I pass an abandoned truck, every time I see someone on the shoulder, every time I notice something that doesn't feel right, I stop, I check, I call it in, because I know what's out there, know what's waiting in the dark, and I know that if I don't stop, if I don't check, if I don't do something, then I'm complicit. I'm part of the problem, and I can't live with that. Last month I found another one, a trailer, parked on a remote turnout. Doors open, chair inside. But this time it was empty. No victim, no blood. Just the chair and the restraints and a note taped to the seat. It read, "We know who you are, Thatcher Gaines. We know what you did, and we're watching, always watching. One day, you'll slip. One day, you'll let your guard down. And when that day comes, we'll be there, and you'll join all the others, the ones who thought they could stop us, the ones who thought they could win. You can't win, Thatcher. You can only run, and eventually, everyone stops running." I burned the note, called Lyle, even though he couldn't do anything, and then I got back in my truck and drove, because that's all I can do. Drive and watch and hope that I'm fast enough, smart enough, lucky enough to stay ahead of them. But deep down, I know the truth. They're right. One day, I'll slip. One day they'll catch me. And when that happens, I'll become another name on another list, another missing person, another unsolved case, another ghost on Highway 299. But until that day comes, I'll keep driving, keep watching, keep fighting. Because Iris deserves that. Because all the women who didn't make it deserve that. And because if I stop, if I give up, then they win. And I can't let them win. So I drive through the darkness, through the forests, through the endless miles of asphalt that stretch across Northern California. And every night, when I close my eyes, I see them, the faces, the women, the ones I saved and the ones I couldn't. And I hear their voices calling to me, reminding me, telling me that this isn't over, that it will never be over, that the highway is alive and hungry, and it will keep taking, keep consuming, keep destroying, until there's nothing left. But I'm still here, still moving, still fighting. And as long as I'm behind this wheel, as long as I'm on this road, I'll keep looking, keep searching, keep hoping that maybe, just maybe, I can make a difference, that I can save one more, stop one more. And maybe that will be enough. But I don't think it will be, because the road doesn't care about heroes. The road doesn't care about justice. The road only cares about the miles. And the miles go on forever. And somewhere, out there in the darkness, on a highway I haven't driven yet, in a truck I haven't seen yet, someone is being taken. Someone is being hurt. Someone is disappearing. And I won't be there to stop it. Because I can't be everywhere. Can't save everyone. Can't stop the machine that grinds on, day after day, night after night, taking and taking and taking until there's nothing left but empty roads and forgotten names and the ghosts of the ones who never made it home. That's what I think about when I drive now. Not the miles I've covered, or the loads I've delivered, or the life I left behind. I think about the ones I couldn't save. The ones still out there. And I wonder if they're thinking of me, hoping that someone will come, that someone will stop, that someone will care. And I promise them, even though they can't hear me, even though they might never know, that I'm trying, that I'm still looking, that I haven't given up, and that as long as I'm alive, as long as I'm on this road, I'll keep fighting. For them, for Iris, for all the ones who got away, and all the ones who didn't. Because that's all I have left. That's all any of us have. The fight, the hope, and the endless unforgiving road that stretches out before us, dark and uncertain and waiting.